Okay, can you guys hear me? Can someone let me know if you hear? Okay, welcome to Analytics YouTube Live. We are going to jump right in. This is going to be a deep dive, a really deep dive into the shooting death of Charles Vallow. There's a lot to unpack. So let's just jump right in. So the first thing I want to address that I think should have been a red flag to law enforcement. And let me say, first of all, I am not anti-law enforcement. This is not a political discussion. I think, far and wide, law enforcement does an amazing job at protecting citizens. And I'm not trying to armchair it here. And I also don't think that this is a case of hindsight is just 2020. And I'm going to make a case for that. I think that there were some really egregious oversights in this case. And I've already addressed the oversights with Gilbert Police Department, but today we are going to focus on Chandler. They were kissing cousins. They're both in the suburbs of the Phoenix area. And so, there's some crossover, but Gilbert took care of everything up to about January, not even into February. I don't think they were even still involved. But Charles and Lori had moved to Texas, and then Lori separated from Charles again, moving back to Chandler. So they lived in Queen Creek, then Gilbert, then Chandler within the Phoenix area. And so she was only in Chandler for a couple months before taking off for Rexburg. But during that time in Chandler is when Charles was shot. Now, I believe that she moved to Chandler for the explicit purpose of murdering Charles. I don't think it would have been to her benefit to have him murdered. And I do believe Charles was murdered. And I do believe that there will be convictions in this, mostly because of the extraordinary pressure on Chandler. I have very little confidence in the police departments in the Phoenix area, including the Phoenix Police Department, which is dropping the ball, or was dropping the ball on my brother's death. I don't know if they're going to investigate that moving forward. That said, it wouldn't have been to Lori's benefit at all for Charles to die in Texas because she didn't have the same connections there. She was only in Houston for a matter of weeks, maybe a couple months before moving back to Chandler, where she had tons of connections. So I want to jump into the timing of the death, first of all. So I am going to share my screen here. And we are going to, whoops, let me try that again. I'm going to be sharing my screen quite a bit. All right, get me out of the shot there. Okay, so Lori said that Charles was supposed to arrive at 7:30 in the morning. Then she says in here, it ended up being more like 7:40, 7:30ish, but she wasn't sure. So right away, this is a little bit of red flag for me. Not that law enforcement should have necessarily identified this as a red flag. Personally, this is a red flag because knowing Lori and seeing the history of her interview with the Gilbert Police Department, when Lori kind of hedges over something, it's usually pretty significant. So why would she care about 10 minutes? Certainly, Lori is not very careful when it comes to details or the truth, as we will see in one of the accounts she gave in her in her testimony. Her statement, it is absolutely bizarre. So she's not particularly pedantic or cares about details. So this kind of stood out to me, and I will circle back toward the end because I am going to share what I think happened to Charles for whatever that is worth. But I just want to start with all the facts. So she says that he was supposed to be there at 7:30. He's usually punctual. That I can attest to. Charles is punctual. But then she kind of hedges over if it was 7:40, 7:35. This is significant because I think that there's a strong possibility that Lori was concerned that there might be something like there might be some evidence that would suggest when he got there. Where the concern comes in for me is when you get to the police report, you see here that it says that Charles was shot at approximately 8:20. So let's give her the full benefit of the doubt and say Charles got there. You see Alex's truck in the driveway. So Charles already had concerns about Alex. His attorney said that he had said, if anything happens to me, it was Alex. Kay and Larry said that he told them, if anything happens to me, it was Alex and Lori. So he was very, very concerned about Alex. And also keep in mind, Alex attacked my brother after he and Lori had divorced, quite a while after they had divorced. So, and Charles had a front row seat for that. So I think Charles was very aware that he had become Joe 2.0. And he saw the family distancing themselves. And so all the things that happened most likely to my brother Joe was now happening to him. And he's just caught in this eddy. He's just circling the drain, trying to find some kind of traction. There's a lot of movement around this time. We know from Lori's statement that her brother Adam had just come into town. And I have a source, and I don't quote anonymous sources. It sounds really douchey, but it is a reliable anonymous source who told me that Adam, Lori's brother Adam, had come into Phoenix the day before Charles was shot. So there was a lot of movement around this time, and Charles had some level of camaraderie with Adam, or at least thought he did. We don't really know what the deal is there. Certainly, Lori has pretty deep animosity toward Adam. So there seems to have been some kind of congruity between Adam and Charles. But the rest of the family was very much distancing themselves from Charles. So for Charles to arrive at the house and just hang out for 40 minutes, for me, that's just not believable. I just don't think that that's something that he would have done. I think he would have come in, just gotten JJ and gotten out of there. So I do believe that he was ambushed. And like I said, we'll circle back on that. So I just want to establish this concern of the timing. And I had to decide what to include, what not to include. And you will see in some of the quotes that we'll cover, there's a lot of confusion around the timing. And again, you don't know we have like a tiny fraction of the overall police report. So we don't know who else was interviewed. We don't know, all the tests that were run. So I tried to give Chandler as much benefit of the doubt as possible. However, there is one point that we will get to that I absolutely cannot give them the benefit of the doubt. At absolute minimum, there's some clarification that is desperately needed. So first of all, I just this really gives me pause, this whole issue of timing. So we'll just put that on the back burner and move forward. So okay. Yep. And there we go. That was supposed to be here. Okay, and I'm going to share a video. This is actually going to be a collection of videos. We're going to start with a portion of the Dateline video that talks specifically about the investigation that was done. And then I titrate in, I just stitch in other videos and other pieces of evidence that I feel kind of contradicts some of this officer's statements. So, and
Alex tries to intervene into this, and Alex describes that Charles eventually strikes him
with the baseball bat, that is.
I went to my room and got my gun.
Moments later, Charles was dead.
So we essentially had Charles deceased on the floor, a couple shell casings.
I'm gonna go see if we can get this. You want to stay here? I'll see if I can get this guy's info. 1, 2, 3, 4 shots, something like that.
Okay. And so first off, that when I caught that, the 1, 2, 3, 4 shots, that was deeply concerning to me because the story was I keep saying Alex, excuse me. Charles was shot twice in the chest, and that there were just a couple of shots. I mean, overall. So then you have this officer saying 1, 2, 3, 4 shots. Then there was this snippet in the 48 Hours episode. Unfortunately, they have the video behind a firewall. So I only have the audio. I don't know why they would do that. They're losing out on huge traffic with that decision. However, this audio, I think, was very, very enlightening. And I don't know if they just cleaned up the audio that was publicly available, because I went through all of the videos and I have transcripts of all of the videos, and I couldn't find this in there. So I suspect that they cleaned up audio. Let's take a listen. And you will hear, and these are just visual cues for me. You will hear an F-bomb. So if you're sensitive to that, too bad.
He came at me with a bat.
And they were taking a harder look at the death of Charles Vallow.
Yeah.
Maybe this wasn't self-defense. Fine.
Okay, so here you have an officer in the background saying that Alex shot the fuck out of Charles. Well, 2 shots doesn't really elicit that kind of response, unless this guy is just a drama king. Then there was this other curious thing that is happening in the background. So it's kind of easy to miss. I just put this here again as a visual cue. I'm not saying that he's destroying evidence, even though it looks like he's, at minimum, it looks like this officer is picking up these shell casings, and no one had arrived yet. Like the investigation was just starting. So that seemed really, really unusual to me. So let's just take a look. Okay, first of all, I'm including this snippet of the video just to give you kind of an idea of the layout of the room. So what you're going to see is the officer come into this area here, pick up a couple of shell casings, and then you're going to see where Charles is lying in comparison. It's on the other side of the room. So I blur him out here, but I just want to kind of give a spatial arrangement here. So you see Charles, he's all the way on the other side of the room. So, and here comes Woody. It looks like he's picking up something over there, putting them in a bag. Okay, so that was, again, I don't have training in law enforcement. I don't know if this is standard. It just seems to me, just from the, what, admittedly, just watching true crime and a little bit of common sense, it just seems like this is a premature move. Like, you have a victim lying dead on the floor, and they're already kind of cleaning up the crime scene. So again, someone may have already come in, done trajectory analysis, analyzed the shell casings. I just don't see evidence of that. It looks like they're just setting up to start to do an investigation. And I know the forensics unit hadn't gotten there yet, because you hear some radio chatter about it coming and the timing of it. So again, just another red flag. Now we'll get back to the Dateline episode.
And a bat on the ground. So it was, then at least preliminarily or initially, there was not a whole lot to examine or to look at there.
Okay, so the first fact check we're going to do here, he says basically there wasn't much to do. So what I did was I just went through the little bit of the police report that we have access to, and noted that it said that there was a lack of blood splatter. That should be splatter, not spatter. And I thought that that was interesting, because here you have one officer in almost what seems to be like an excited utterance saying that, Alex shot the fuck out of him. And yet there's this lack of blood splatter, and you don't see blood splatter on the walls. You don't see anything. You don't see like holes in the walls. Not that, they really do like a deep scan. But you also don't see, again, this could be elsewhere in the police report, but you don't see any references in this police report to like any kind of gunshot residue tests, any trajectory analysis, anything like that. And yet we have evidence of, potentially there being 4 shell casings. And then you have another guy saying he was shot several times. So there just seems to be like this, and again, I don't know how normal this level of chaos is, but I just took note of that. Yep. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting in an aggravating way, he said additional blood was observed on the faucet in the kitchen sink. Alex Cox had reported after the shooting he washed his hands in the kitchen sink. Now, one thing that's interesting is in his interview, he said that he washed up his head because he claims that Charles had hit him in the head with a bat. So here in the police report, it says he washed his hands. The person writing the report said, I noticed a small amount of blood near the aerator portion of the faucet. The blood was photographed, but not swabbed for evidence purposes. And so again, as I'm reading through this police report, I'm like, well, okay, that's step one, but why wouldn't this blood be swabbed for evidence purposes? We don't know whose blood that was. We don't know if that was Alex's blood. That could have been Charles' blood. We don't know any of that. So again, that just seemed really unusual to me, and I'm trying to be judicious here. And then this was really perplexing. This is the last page we have access to. But it just said here at the end, prior to Alex returning, I made the decision to clean the large, and then that's it. It's cut off. We don't have access to page 89. And that really gave me concern, because I was like, the large what? The large pool of blood. And I know some YouTubers and people who are far more qualified to speak about this case than I am, have said, well, people don't bleed out like in the movies and on TV. One thing I pushed back a little bit on that, though, was we heard on the 911 call that Alex made the person was walking him through how to do CPR. So she was walking him through the compressions. It's interesting. I mean, I just had to decide, I can't include everything in this video here, but you hear Alex doing these compressions while she's on the phone. She hands off the phone to someone else, and the compressions just totally stop, and he's just talking to the person. So I kind of took note of that. So, the chances are he probably wasn't doing CPR all that long, but the compressions, would have, I would imagine, especially if he was hit 2 or 3 times in the chest. One officer said he was hit in the gut. So again, between these different reports, there's not a whole lot of agreement and congruity, but you would imagine with him doing compressions that would have caused more blood than you saw at the scene.
And everything seemed to correspond with the story that you were told.
Kind of.
But there were things about this. For example, Alex's claim that he fired in self-defense. As he talked to the cops, Alex kept dabbing at a small cut on the back of his head.
Did it look like he'd been hit with a baseball bat? It definitely didn't appear that he was struck with an extreme amount of force to a baseball bat. Charles was a very physically fit man, and actually a former college ball player. So it didn't appear that it was a huge strike to the head.
Okay. So we are going to dive now into some of the contradictions I found. So initially, and usually what I try to do is, just grab snippets of videos. And as I was listing out the contradictions, though, there were so many contradictions that I ended up creating a PowerPoint to kind of organize them because, like I said, there were so many. But before I even get into that, I'll get to it when I talk about something related to it. Hopefully, I won't forget. So, all right. Oops. Okay. So, like I said, I just found that there were so many contradictions. It was really a challenge organizing it all. And so what I did was I just broke it down into different questions. They're not in they're roughly in chronological order, although there's probably some juggling. But I'm just going to go through these questions, and I'm going to follow this format of if there's a contradiction between 2 or more people, I'm going to note that. And then because we're dealing with so many small snippets of these interviews, we're going to use screenshots over videos, because the videos would just get a little jarring because it would just be like, 12 seconds here, maybe 20 seconds over here. And I think some of this is also kind of lost when you're just listening, as when you actually read it. Because I know for myself, one benefit to the dashboard has been in being able to read through some of these, different interviews and stuff. I've been able to catch a lot more things than when I'm just listening, because you kind of go into a passive listening mode, where when I'm reading, I'm really like trying to picture what's going on. Okay, so this is kind of a minor question in all this, but there was a contradiction in who had custody of JJ at that time. So Lori implies in her interview that she did, just ignore the little cameras. Those are just little visual cues to me that I have a screenshot. So this is a snippet from Lori's statement. And I'm just going to go through this. Lori said he, meaning Charles, told her all of a sudden that he was coming Wednesday night and he wanted to see JJ. They block out the kids' names, but it's really obvious most of the time. when they're referring to JJ or Tylee. Lori indicated that she told him she would never keep JJ from him, that he could come see JJ whenever he wanted. So the implication here is that she had JJ, and in some act of kindness, she wasn't going to withhold JJ. But then in true Lori fashion, she kind of pulls, her niece Melanie is really famous for this too, or infamous, I should say. She goes into all of this extraneous detail, explaining what happened in her 58 days away. So Charles said it was 58 days. You see in her statement, she says it was 30 days away, but I thought it was interesting, so I'm just going to read it. Lori indicated her husband ripped their son out of school and said they were moving, and Lori advised she didn't go with him at first. Lori said Charles took their son and Lori let him take their son, and she didn't file anything. And I do think it's kind of funny how this officer, whoever interviewed Lori, really kind of captures Lori's personality, because some of the things that he or she writes is very much how she talks. Lori then advised that he, Charles, filed something and told Lori that she was going to get supervised visits because she was crazy. Capital point. Lori said she just didn't talk to him for like 30 days and let him take care of their son to let their husband see what she had been doing for the last 7 years. Lori mentioned that she has other kids and has grandkids. She has one grandchild, but that could have been the officer's mistake. Lori seemed annoyed that he had threatened she would only have supervised visits with her child, and mentioned that she left him to take care of the child for 30 days to see what it was like, and she knew he would be begging her to pick him up, which she stated he did. Now, Alex said that Lori lived there with Tylee only, and you can check that out. Each of these should have, and I'm going to share a link to the presentation, and you'll see these source links. I like to use Bitly links because they're easier to look at, and they're easier to copy down, like if you just have like a screenshot or something, and then that's the minute mark. All right. Getting into the meat, why did Tylee come out with the bat? So according to Lori, and these little symbols, this is Lori, this is Alex, and this is Tylee. And then this is like if there's any kind of official document. Oops. So why did Tylee come out with the bat? Lori said Charles was screaming because she had his phone. Now this is really a crazy story. But we'll get into a little bit of it. She said, the officer said, I returned the conversation to this morning, and Lori said he came back in. So she claims that Charles took JJ out to the car, and then Charles always leaves something in the house, and he came back. He came back. Oh, he had left his phone on the counter. She grabs the phone. I don't believe any of the story. Any of it, not a word of it, for whatever that's worth. But she claims that, she's kind of rifling through his phone, and this upsets him. So Lori said he came back in, and she wouldn't give him back his phone, and he was screaming at her to give him back his phone. Well, Lori said he was very worried about whatever was on the text that he didn't want her to see. Lori said she was just holding it there and he was screaming at her. Well, Charles was a big guy and he was fit. I mean, he wasn't particularly tall, but he was very fit. So even just this whole picture of like Lori is kind of like the Biff who's bullying him, and he's like, kind of grappling to get his phone. It's just not realistic. But she says he was screaming at her. Lori said she was kind of walking around the house, so he couldn't get it. Obviously, yes, he could have gotten it. And he was kind of reaching for it. Lori said Tylee came out of her room and she had a bat, and Tylee told him to, quote, leave her mother alone. Oops. Okay. Charles, Alex claimed that Tylee came out with the bat because Charles was, quote, getting physical, and he was, quote, he was getting close. So first he said that Charles was getting physical, but then he never circles back on that. He never gives any examples of how he had gotten physical. His only statement was that he was getting close. So Tylee said that she heard yelling, but I thought it was interesting that she said she didn't know what it was about, and we'll take a look at that. Okay, so the investigator writes, I asked Tylee if she could tell me what happened that day and told her to start with whatever place made sense, adding I would probably ask questions. Tylee advised that she woke up around 7:50 because she heard yelling outside her door. Tylee said she immediately jumped up. Tylee stated she has a baseball bat and explained that when she had been living at her uncle's, when she was by herself, she wanted something to feel safer, and she's not old enough for pepper spray. I'm just going to take a quick diversion here. I think I talked about this a little bit in the Q&A, but this kind of hit me on a personal level because I am a big proponent of pepper spray. And I had told Tylee, she was a very young new driver when I was out there. And I wrote a blog post, like if you search Annie Cushing pepper spray, I think it was from 2013. I wrote this blog post about pepper spray, and the Huffington Post picked it up. Excuse me. And it was like just an appeal to women. So I had actually told Tylee, you should just always have pepper spray on your key ring. And I go into details in the blog post about how I really believe that pepper spray has saved both my girls and my lives. But that said, I just thought it was so interesting here that she would talk about pepper spray. First of all, why was she at her uncle's alone? So Alex drove a truck, so he was gone a lot. And this really kind of tugged at me because I was like, well, Lori lived in the area. So why would a 15, 16-year-old be living alone at her uncle's? I mean, whether he's away or he's there, that's concerning because Lori was right there. And we know that when Lori took off, she had taken Tylee with her. So this was a big question mark. I do wonder if it had to do with, Charles had mentioned something about them having emancipated kids, and he mentioned kids. And we know that Colby had been emancipated as a teenager. But then there was this question mark about Tylee. Well, Arizona is very specific about the requirements for a child to be emancipated. And one of the requirements is they have to live on their own at another address for, I think it's like 3 months. So I just wonder if Lori was trying to scam the system and had Tylee staying by herself at Alex's to try to get this emancipation. And who knows how that could potentially tie into, the insurance scam or, whatever. I have no idea. But I just thought that was really sad. Here you have this woman who has no regard for the law, appears to have played, at least some kind of role in a number of these deaths, if not all of them, potentially including my brother. And yet then she quibbles over this issue of pepper spray because you're supposed to be 18 to carry pepper spray. So anyway, okay. So moving on, Tylee said she just kind of stood there with the bat, and I asked who was yelling when she said they were yelling. Tylee stated it was mostly her stepdad. And then she said he was really the one yelling and that her mom was responding. Tylee couldn't say what they were saying. So I just thought that was really curious because here you have, again, if you take like a pause and try to climb inside Tylee's mind at this moment, she hears yelling. Well, obviously she had a high drama mama, so yelling, that wouldn't have necessarily elicited a response of, I'm going to grab this baseball bat. I actually don't believe any of the bat story. But that said, just yelling alone wouldn't necessarily, elicit that. And another thing that is interesting about Tylee is, just from my, limited experience with Tylee, one of the things, and I've talked about this in other videos, I've talked about it in other interviews that I've done. Tylee was very, very honest, like to a point of being so detail oriented that she was pedantic. So her mom is loose and free with the truth. And Tylee was everything the opposite of her mom. So when I was there, I had noted, and I teased Tylee about this because, she was just like nipping at Lori's heels, and correcting her on a very, very regular basis. And one time Lori was bragging about her and Tylee corrected her, and it was a brag, and so I was like, dude, who does that? Like just roll with it. But for Tylee, it was cheapened because there was some detail in it that wasn't true. So I joked with her that she'd be a great analyst. But anyway, so I just wonder if, given Tylee's, commitment to the truth, to facts, I wrote a post about this in True Crime Underground and included a video compilation of all the times in the Gilbert interview where Tylee contradicted Lori and Melanie. And I don't think that she was even doing it to, kind of be vexing. I think it's just this, it was just this gravitational pull. It was her personality. And so I do have this theory that when Lori she took Tylee on this drive to drop off JJ. And I have a feeling that Lori made it very, very clear, because the stakes were so high, that there would be no contradicting her, and no contradicting Alex. And so when they come, you just see Tylee. She has this habit that I've seen even when I was there, when Lori would talk about things that really stressed Tylee out. Tylee, I'm always kind of noting self-soothing behaviors that people have, because I'm a hand wringer. Like when I'm stressed or excited or, anything that's kind of above the baseline, I wring my hands. And Tylee was a self-hugger. So whenever she would get stressed, I would see her just like close up, and it looked like she was kind of giving herself a hug, like her hands went up almost to her shoulders. And so it was really heartbreaking when I saw that when she was in the Gilbert Police Department. And you also see some of that when she was being interviewed for the little bit of footage that we saw of Tylee. So I just wonder here if Tylee was trying to toe the line, because I think she knew that her life was on the line. According to Melanie Gibb, Lori had already called her a zombie, and that had been sometime in the spring. So, and this event happened in July 11th. So I think Tylee was aware that she was potentially on the chopping block here. And so I just wonder if she was trying to toe the line while telling the least amount of giving the least amount of false information as possible. So here you see that she's telling them, she's concerned. She jumps up immediately. She grabs a bat to go after her very physically fit stepdad. And, Tylee was 5'0", so there would have been a significant power differential between them. But, so apparently, she's saying she was concerned enough that she would grab a bat and, head on out to tell her Charles to knock it off. And yet she couldn't give them any details about what was actually said. So I thought that was notable. Okay, moving on. I have some lag going here. All right, how many times did Charles, how many times did Alex hit Charles? Oh, no, I'm sorry. So no, this was, how many times did Charles hit Alex? I've been switching them back and forth so much. I thought that I had gotten that wrong. Okay, so this is the part. So Lori, and I hadn't caught this before. I just caught this like maybe about a month ago. That, you know, the main story that we've been hearing is that that Charles hit Alex one time, and that is already under question because, you know, it's pretty well known at this point. Charles played ball in college. I played softball for I forget if it was 8 or 9 years. I think I took a year off, and so I just knew from play, and I sucked as a batter. I was like your typical pitcher, and I was tiny, and so, you know, I was like under 5 foot, and, you know, they would say, Annie, put your weight into the ball, and I was like a stick, you know, so I was like, I am, and I couldn't get it past the outfield. I did get a grand slam once, but it was on 4 errors. Anyway, okay, so, but we learned in softball that all of your power is in your core. So you do this thing, it's kind of similar to golf, where you pivot, you know, and you practice that move a lot, you know. So it looks like baseball is, you know, all about the arms. And when you're in the outfield, yeah, it obviously is, although you need your core there too. But when it comes to batting, that's all core. And so when we go through, and we're about to go through Lori's absolutely batshit account of what happened, it is one so far beyond the pale for Charles as a former baseball player, but then also, I mean, Alex would have been hospitalized. So let's take a look at what this looked like. All right. Oops. Okay. Let's see, where is it? I think it's right here. Oh, yeah, okay. I mean, it's really, really crazy. Okay, so it says here, I returned the conversation to this morning. Again, this is Lori's statement. And Lori said this is talking about Charles, came back in and she wouldn't give him back his phone. He was screaming to give her back the phone. Lori said he was very worried about whatever was on the text that he didn't want her to see. And I don't even know why he would have been worried about that. Like and also why she would have even felt entitled to do this. Like, they were separated. Like, she had absolutely, not that she would have a right to his phone, even if they were together, but especially being separated. Like, this is just so crazy. Lori said she was just holding it out there. He was screaming at her. Lori was kind of walking around the house. So we've already talked about this. And then Lori said her brother Alex heard the commotion and he came out into the main room. We'll get to that contradiction because that contradicts other statements. Lori said her husband is screaming and is super upset. I could totally hear Lori say that. She loves the word super. Lori doesn't know if Tylee swung at him or what, but he grabbed the bat from Tylee and went to hit Tylee with the bat. And she's right there. And her brother, and she's talking about her brother Alex, is right there. And her brother grabbed him from behind to stop him from hitting Tylee. Okay, I already have an issue here. So imagine, if you will, Charles is in the room. He's fit, he's strong. 2, he's the only one who has, according to the story, who has a weapon in his hand. So why would he have ever let Alex come at him from behind? He wouldn't have ever had, it doesn't make sense that he would have had his back turned to Alex, because certainly Tylee wasn't a threat to him, and it would have been very easy for him to grab the bat from her. Okay, moving along. Lori is motioning. Okay, this is where we really enter the crazy zone. Lori is motioning with her right arm, and Lori says it's to grab him and pull him back. Lori said that her brother and her husband get into the thing. Again, I can so hear Lori say that. And he's hitting her brother with the bat. So this is not one hit. This is multiple hits. So according to her, they're on the floor, and Charles is repeatedly, at least more than once, it sounds like 3 or more times, hitting Alex with the bat. They're on the ground, like grappling around or whatever. Lori said it happened quickly. I asked if her brother was struck with the bat when they were grappling, and Lori stated yes, and that he, meaning Charles, was hitting her brother, and Lori is swinging her right arm downward. So try to picture this. They're grappling around on the floor, but Charles still has the bat in his right hand, and he's going all like bam bam with it. Like he's swinging the bat down onto Alex. This makes absolutely no sense. I mean, bats are somewhat heavy. This might have been a child's bat, so it probably wasn't too heavy. But for him to have the bat in one hand, and it gets much crazier than this, but I'm still going to focus on this. For him to have the bat with one hand and hitting Alex that way, one, he risks pulling out his shoulder, like getting a rotator cuff injury or something like that. But also, it would have been conceivable, or at least a conceivable risk, that Alex could have grabbed the bat. So, again, it comes down to muscle memory. I mean, this just doesn't make sense. If Charles was down on the floor with Alex, I think he would have dropped the bat and they would have been going to blows. But Lori said he is swinging the bat back and forth and they are on the ground. Lori said she is freaking out and is trying to go around and knows JJ is in the car. So this kind of caught my attention because I was like, okay, mid-July here in New York is pretty hot. I can't imagine what it would be like in Phoenix. And now, according to her story, JJ would have been in the car for quite a while, for all of this like scuffle to go down. And according to all of their stories, Tylee did not join JJ in the car right away because apparently, she was trying to threaten Charles, and there will be more details to that. So I just looked at the weather for July 11th, 2019, and the low was 90 and the high was 114. So JJ, according to Lori's story, would have just been sitting in this sweltering, heat in a car locked in. And you also kind of have to understand when I was there, like they had to go to great lengths because JJ was a runner. And so like they had special locks on the front door that locked from the inside. And we always had to lock the deadbolts from within and make sure that the key was set up high enough so that JJ couldn't get to it, either reaching it or dragging over a chair because he would run. And in the car, they couldn't keep him in any kind of car seat. So even when they would be driving, JJ would be climbing all over the place. And so sometimes it was pretty stressful. I know it was at times worrisome, but I haven't had, I don't have any children on the spectrum, so I wasn't like judging them or anything. It's just notable that this would have been, even just in 2018, a significant risk that would not have made sense. It just wouldn't have made sense for Charles, with as protective as he was. Not that law enforcement would have been aware of all these dynamics, but it wouldn't be realistic for Charles to have left JJ in a hot car just alone while he went in to get the phone. Okay. Lori said her husband, gets up and he has the bat towards her and is motioning. She's motioning with her right hand as if a person would be swinging backhanded. So now he's no longer going bunga bunga on Alex. He's threatening her, but like he's holding the bat, still one-handed, but backhanded. It makes no sense. Lori said she is going around the other side because she is trying to get out of his range so he couldn't hit her. Lori begins to say she told Tylee, and then explains that Tylee is on the ground. So Lori starts to say something and then realizes that it seems like in her account, she forgets this detail of Tylee being on the floor. She keeps calling it the ground. Because when she took the bat from Tylee, or when he took the bat, so when Charles took the bat from Tylee, she fell back. Lori told Tylee to go get in the car with JJ because she didn't want JJ coming in, and she wanted Tylee out and didn't want the kids in the house for whatever this fight was going to be. Which is an odd thing to say. But the picture that you have, that she paints, is total mayhem. And when I like stopped and just read her statement, you know, kind of in a slow, painstaking way, I was like, what is up with these officers? Like, did none of them play baseball? Like, were they all on the chess club? Because anyone who played baseball, and I wasn't anywhere near the level of Charles, but if you just have that experience, you would know, like, these aren't natural motions. Like, if Charles is going after her first, I don't believe that he would have gone after her with a bat. Like, this is just so far beyond the realm of what is possible, in my opinion. But these motions that she's describing are just, in my mind, just completely unbelievable, because Charles would have had that muscle memory, and none of these would have, you know, this isn't tennis. Like, you don't hold a bat in a backhanded kind of way. Anyway, okay, so getting back to the presentation. All right, so Lori says that Charles hit Alex repeatedly. Alex said that Charles hit him once. We'll take a look at this. So this is a screenshot of the dashboard, because this allows us to just read the transcript. And you can see, if you want to check it out, you can see the minute marks where everything was said. This is the title of the video, the person speaking. And then some of these include notes that I've written. So if you open up the dashboard, all you have to do, if you see a check mark like this, is hover over this column here, and the note will pop up. Okay, so a police officer said, and where are you both at? Alex said, we were in the living room. So he's asking, the police officer is asking Alex, where were he and Charles? And he said, we were in the living room, and then I turned around and he hit me in the back of the head with the bat. So I went to my room and got my gun, because I always carry it. Yeah, whatever, dude, makes sense. You went to your room, meaning the room you're staying in? Alex said, yes. And you brought a gun with you? And Alex said, yes. So Alex says that Charles hit him one time, and then he bolted to go get his gun. Okay, when did Alex enter the conflict? Oops. Okay, so Lori says that Alex entered the conflict after Tylee came out with the bat. Let's take a look at that. This is just a visual cue here. This is Lori speaking. I returned the conversation to this morning, and Lori said he came back in and she wouldn't give him back his phone. He was screaming at her to give him back his phone. Lori said she was very worried about whatever was on the text, blah, blah, blah. We've already read this. Lori said Tylee came out of her room upset, and she had a bat, and Tylee told him to leave her mother alone. Lori said he is screaming at her, being Tylee, don't you hit me with that bat. Lori said her brother, Alex, heard the commotion, and he came out into the main room. So according to her statement, Alex wasn't out when all of the commotion was going on. So he heard the commotion with Tylee, and then that's what brought him into the conflict. Alex claimed that he entered the conflict after Tylee came out with the bat. So, okay, so this is the person interviewing Alex. Whoops. And the officer said, okay, before your sister and your niece left, at some point your sister and her husband are arguing. And Alex said, yes. He said, verbal argument. And then your niece pulls out a bat. And Alex said, well, it wasn't verbal. He was getting close. So I had already mentioned this. Like, he doesn't say that he ever hit Lori. He says that it wasn't verbal, but then all he says is that he was getting close. But that's not the point of this. And then your niece pulls out a bat. Well, okay, whoops. Yes, and law enforcement says, your niece, okay. And then she poked out and then she took it away. And the officer said, okay. And then I stepped in and I told them that they need to separate. Now, in this particular instance, Tylee has a different account. So they both, at least in this case, Lori and Alex, they agreed that Alex entered after Tylee came out with the bat. But Tylee didn't get that memo. So she said that he was already out in the hallway engaging in this big argument. And because we know that because she mentions that she heard all of their voices. So we see here, Tylee said she immediately jumped up, she got the bat, she opened the door, and it was her stepdad outside in the doorway and her uncle kind of in the doorway, and she could hear her mom behind him. Tylee said her stepdad was screaming at both of them, but she doesn't know what he was saying. So again, we already covered this, but this is just to make the point that according to Tylee, Alex was already out there. He was involved in the conflict, and then she entered the conflict. Again, this is a fairly minor point. It's just more that it's more like the number of contradictions. When you have this number of contradictions, and we haven't even gotten to all of them, this should have pricked law enforcement, in my opinion, in some way. Okay, when did Charles allegedly attack Alex? So Lori said that Charles attacked Alex before she left with the kids, because she gave that whole account about him, with the bat and, going all bam bam on him, and then, backhand with the bat at her, so she was aware. But in this instance, Alex didn't get the memo, and he claims that it was after Lori left with the kids. So let's take a look at that. So the officer, he's interviewing Alex again. You can check out the video if you want. The link will be in the presentation. Gotcha. So at some point earlier today, they get into some kind of domestic violence. Alex said, yeah, just this morning. Then they left, meaning Lori and Tylee left, and then he came at me. They left, meaning who? Both the parties? Yeah, my sister took my niece and my nephew. And the officer says, so they left. And Alex adds more detail. He says, to create some space from him. And then he came at me, meaning Charles then came at him. And even his story in how Charles came at him, like I said, I mean, there were so many contradictions. This presentation isn't even going to cover all of them. Like at some point, I just had to say, okay, well, I've already kind of touched on that. But he actually says at one point that he said to Charles, hey, don't touch my sister like that. Well, at this point in his story, Lori and Tylee were already gone. So it's like, well, why? That's a weird flex. Why are you confronting Charles about how he supposedly touch Lori in that conflict when she was already gone. Okay, how did Tylee fall down? Again, kind of a minor point, but it speaks to this, just the number of contradictions. So Lori said she fell back when Charles grabbed the bat. And you can read that in her statement. Well, actually, I included. Okay. Lori doesn't know if Tylee swung at him or what, but she grabbed the bat from Tylee and went to hit him with the bat, and she's right there, and her brother is right there, and her brother grabbed him from behind. So she's saying Alex grabbed, Charles from behind to stop him from hitting Tylee. Then she goes on to say, Lori begins to say that she told Tylee, and then explains that Tylee is on the ground because when she took the bat from Tylee, she fell back. So Lori says that Charles goes to take the bat from Tylee and Tylee falls backwards. Alex says he didn't say that she didn't fall. He just didn't mention anything about her falling on the floor. So this seemed to be a pretty significant point for Lori, because she needs this point to explain why Tylee wasn't there when Charles was actually shot. But then Tylee, again, I just think they just didn't have a lot of time to get their story straight. I suspect that Tylee didn't know that Charles was going to be shot that day, and Lori was frantically telling her the line, the storyline when they were in the car. So Tylee said she was lunged forward, falling on her side. So it says here, Tylee said she's holding it by the place where you hold it, meaning the bat. And he kind of took it, and Tylee gets lunged forward and she lost her footing. Tylee indicated her mom said, just let go. And Tylee said she kind of slipped and fell kind of on her side, So again, I mean, this is a fairly minor point compared to some of these points. And yet this incident had just happened. So and they were all there for it. Now, I'm sure, given the level of chaos, that could account for some of the differences in their stories. But I just thought, I would think that, you would, as a mother, you would be watching your daughter and you would take note of how she felt, because that would, cause you concern. Again, I think the whole story is made up, and I think that they just didn't, because I don't believe Tylee would have been, just copacetic with this whole plan. And so the drawback there was that there was very little time and a lot of adrenaline, rushing. And Lori does mention in her statement that Tylee was freaking out in the car, as you would expect. And so I just think they just didn't have a lot of time to really kind of get some of the details straight. And, again, when you're telling the truth, you just have to, kind of relive what you saw. Not that we're necessarily going to have 100% accuracy, but that's a lot easier than memorizing a story. Okay. All right. Where were Lori and the kids when Alex shot Charles? Now, this is a really significant point, and this I absolutely hold law enforcement responsible for not catching the huge difference between Lori and Alex's story. Okay, so Lori says that they were at the house when Charles was shot. I asked her, this is the officer saying, I asked Lori what her husband or brother was yelling through all of this. Okay, this was just ridiculous. And Lori stated, get off me, and ow, and such. That's a little literal. But anyway, but she didn't really remember specifics. Again, I think, under normal circumstances, she would have, but she had the concern of, she didn't know, if this wasn't something that they talked about, I'm sure she would have been concerned about, giving a conflicting account from what Alex and Tylee gave. Lori stated there weren't many words during the heat of it, and that she remembered. I confirmed that Tylee went outside, and I asked what happened. Lori stated they got up from that, and her brother, this should have been stepped back. There are typos all through this police report. I mean, these statements. Her brother stepped back, and then Charles was coming at her with the bat, yelling at her to give him his phone. I mean, I'm just going to stop right here. If you're so concerned for your life, and this is another huge, I think, really, really significant sticking point. Why wouldn't she just give him the phone? I mean, obviously, she wasn't going to be able to rifle through his phone. This was a zero-sum game. She was going to have to give the phone back at some point. So, you're saying that you were afraid, and everyone was afraid, and there was all of this chaos, and yet the power, according to her story, again, I don't believe any of her story, but according to her story, except that she and Tylee were there for the shooting, that part I believe. Most of it is just sheer nonsense. But why wouldn't she have just given him back his phone? And, again, we don't have access to the full police report. Police officers may have noted their concern with this detail, except ultimately what we do know is that no one was arrested, and Lori and Alex were free to leave on their own reconnaissance. And Alex had a history. I mean, he went to jail for attacking my brother and threatening to kill him. So there's some history here, and so we know that no one was arrested, and no one was ever arrested in the shooting. I mean, now it's 2020, and now Chandler is backpedaling and saying, "Hey, we're going to investigate," and I'm grateful for that, and I hope that this time around the mountain they do a much more effective job. And I think that they will, because there are a lot more eyes on this. They didn't know that this would, that they would play a role in enabling, potentially a person who would go on to become, again, potentially a serial killer. We don't know the details yet of her role in these other deaths. Okay. Lori stated that she still had the phone in her hand, and all this happened really quickly. Lori went around kind of in a circle, and her brother was there. I asked Charles how Charles was holding the bat, so we already went through that. He was holding it backwards, yada, yada. Lori said she was kind of turned around, and the kids were outside, and she heard the gunshot. So she's describing like she was just kind of all turned around because Charles was coming at her, which to me implies that Charles was close by. And then, her back just happens to be turned, and she hears the gunshot, meaning one gunshot. I asked that she heard the shot, and she indicated yes. I don't know if this officer didn't know that there were multiple shots, because you can kind of claim that maybe, not really, for one shot, 3 or 4, this just doesn't pass the sniff test. Anyway, okay. I asked if she actually saw the shot or if she just heard it. Lori said that she had gone around to the kitchen to get away from him and then came back around, and I advised her that I had not been inside the residence. In other words, her talking about running circuits through the house. He had no context for this because he hadn't been to the house. Lori said that she didn't see the shot, that she heard it, and she came back around when she saw him on the ground. Again, this does not at all line up with the one officer's account that Alex shot the mustard out of Charles. So this doesn't line up with anything, and this only accounts for one of the possible 3 to 4. I believe that there were most likely 4 shots. Now, Alex said that they were gone when he shot Charles, that Lori had already taken Tylee and JJ. So here we're back with the interview. So the the officer, he loves to say, gotcha. So at some point earlier today, they get into some kind of domestic. Yeah, just this morning. Then they left, and then he came at me. They left, meaning who? Both the parties? Yeah, my sister took my niece and nephew. So they left to create some space for him. And again, he states, then he came at me. So he says that Lori, JJ, and Tylee were gone when the shooting occurred. Again, this is a really, really big one. This can't be explained away. So Tylee sides with Lori on this one. Well, she doesn't side with her. She has the same story as Lori does. But also keep in mind, both Lori and Alex, and I'm actually not even just saying this to be insulting. If they were intelligent, I would give them that. But neither one of them are particularly intelligent. The Lori's conniving. I don't know what Alex ever brought to the table. His mom said he was funny and easygoing. Even Melanie Pulaski said she didn't get his humor, which I thought was hilarious. But anyway, so these guys just aren't like really super smart. They're not Mensa material here. And so, I would have thought that like this would have been a key detail that they would have gotten right, but it may have been discussed. I imagine it would have been, but who knows? But I thought it was interesting that when Alex was on the 911 call, they asked for the spelling of Charles' last name, and he said it was Vallo. So he had been his brother-in-law for, I think, 14 years, maybe, somewhere around there, between 13 and 15 years. All three of those numbers have been thrown out in different interviews, and I just didn't think to look it up. But, for quite a while, and he didn't even know how his brother-in-law and nephew's last name was spelled, and Vallo that's not tricky. Anyway, okay, enough of that. Tylee sides with Lori, says they were at the house. So the person interviewing Tylee said, I asked if she knew what happened inside the house and if her mom had explained it to her. Tylee said she heard a noise and that she knows what it was now, but she thought that it was someone taking the bat and hitting it really hard against the floor. Now, okay, this is the one claim. I mean, clearly Tylee had not been around guns. I actually looked up the decibel ratings. I forgot to grab that screenshot and pull it into this presentation. The decibel ratings for the gun that Alex had was like it would be painful to hear it. So to have 4 shots. Now I do wonder if Alex used a silencer, because I think it would be very unusual if you have 3 to 4 shots with 45 that no one would have heard the gunshots. It's also interesting that at one point, one of the officers is interviewing Alex, and a neighbor comes up, and the officer is kind of rough and gruff and says, "Who are you? Who are you?" And he said, I'm a neighbor, and something about wanting to help. And he was like, "No, we're good." And then he's like, "Thanks, man," and anyway, but so I'm curious, like, well, did they ever circle back with the neighbors? Hopefully they did, but we're totally in the dark. We don't know what level of investigation was done, but, I would have thought that he would have at least said, hey, let's start a queue over here and assign an officer, because they had quite a few officers out there. There's one part of one of the videos, the video where Alex is in the police car. So that one, not the one that we usually see where that has like Charles on the floor. And at one point there was like a powwow among them, and there were quite a few officers. Now, again, I have no training in law enforcement. They may have all been tasked with other assignments. I just am curious, especially with them reopening the investigation. What did they glean from the neighbors? Did someone hear these shots? Because I wonder if not only if Alex used a silencer, but if that was one of Lori's jobs when she left the scene. to hide the silencer, because Brandon noted when he was shot at that it looked like, at first he thought, I think he said something about thinking it was a paint gun, and then I guess the appearance of a paint gun is similar to a 45 with a silencer. I don't know. I'm really not. I've been to gun ranges twice in my life. Okay. Why did Charles allegedly attack Alex with a bat? So Lori claims that that Charles attacked Alex for stopping Charles from hitting Tylee with the bat. So let's take a look at that screenshot. Lori doesn't know. Okay, so we've covered this before, but I'm focusing in on whatever is supporting this particular claim. Lori doesn't know if Tylee swung at him or what, but he grabbed the bat from her and went to hit Tylee with the bat. Again, I just don't believe that would be something that Charles would ever do. And she's right there, and her brother's right there, and her brother grabbed him from behind to stop him from hitting Tylee. Lori's motioning with her right arm, and Lori said it's to grab him and pull him back. Lori said that her brother and her husband get into the thing, and he's hitting her brother with the bat, and they're on the ground, like grappling around or whatever. So Alex claims that it's for interfering in Charles and Lori's fight. So Lori's claiming that he was angry because Alex stopped him from hitting Tylee with the bat, or at least that's the implication, appears to be the implication. Alex says it's for interfering in Charles and Lori's fight. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I do have a screenshot. So Alex is talking, and he said they were talking earlier, then she left, and then he got into it with me. Like what? What do you mean? The officer who's interviewing him. I don't know. He was accusing me of, and then there was a loud noise with a truck. So the officer says, come on over here. That truck's going to be really loud. So the officer says, what was he accusing you of? And it seems like Alex, and it's interesting because like he asks him what the officer was accusing him of, and Alex keeps walking. Like it was like he was like, oh, I can't answer the question until, I've moved over to the new spot. But I think what he was actually doing was buying himself time. And I think he was like, oh shit, well, what would he have been accusing me of? Because that's an odd statement. Like it's one thing if he claimed that, Charles was accusing Lori of something, but what would he be accusing Alex of? So Alex decides to kind of shift directions and says, I don't know. He was just yelling at me. So he just changes the story altogether. And he's saying, he doesn't remember what he's being accused of. Again, that's just not believable, because most of us, if we're being accused of something falsely, we remember that, because it triggers, rage. So the officer said, okay, what was he yelling at you about? And Alex says, about my sister, because I had broken up a tussle with them earlier, and he told me not to interfere anymore with them or I'd pay. And then he came at me with a bat. I mean, again, this just makes no sense. Like, okay, so at this point, Lori already left with the kids in his little fantasy. So Lori left with the kids, and then Charles tells him in this, Charles tells him, hey, don't interfere anymore. Now, why would Charles do that? At that point, JJ is in the car. He's been in the car. Yeah, well, no. Actually, we don't know. Yeah, no one accounted for, like, if Charles was ever told that that Lori was taking JJ. So that's actually an outstanding question, meaning outstanding as in not answered, not saying. It's not self-congratulatory. Anyway, so, but it just doesn't make sense. Like, Lori's gone. Why would he, at that point, like, Charles would have wanted to get out of there. Again, I think this whole thing is just a heaping pile of garbage. But it doesn't make sense. Okay. I'm experiencing some lag. I live in the city and the internet is very unreliable. Oh, okay. No, we're at the end of it. That was the last one. Okay. So that was the last of the contradictions. So now I want to circle back and share what I think happened, for whatever that's worth. I mean, just from studying all of these transcripts, going through all of this information, I think it was an ambush. I think that when Charles walked in, if you look at the positioning of the body, and I almost, I blurred it out in that one video and I almost had a screenshot, but it could just be really upsetting to see, a dead man lying on the floor like that. But I mean, it's out there. You can watch the video, but you see Charles, I think the most believable story is he walked down those steps that led into the living room. And I don't think he got more than a few steps before there was just an array of bullets that came his way, because you see that he is just like, and the positioning seems somewhat contrived. Like, he almost looks messianic in how his arms are just, out straight. It's just like, he was just hit by this barrage of bullets, fell backwards, and died. I do question if Alex or someone, messed with the crime scene, because there's a very small amount of blood for someone who was apparently, just barraged with a spray of bullets. I'm also curious why they didn't do some kind of trajectory analysis, and definitely why they didn't do gunshot, why they didn't test for gunshot residue, because there's no guarantee that Alex was the one who even pulled the trigger. And that's something that, like, there's science, there's a trajectory analysis, so they could look at the entrance wounds compared to the exit wounds. They could look at, whatever hit the walls, and see, like, and like reverse engineer the height of the person. I mean, whoever this was, either they were like really stressed out, just hopped up on adrenaline, or just a really, really terrible shot, because you have a person who's just walking into, what I believe was just walked right into to this attack. So it shouldn't have been. And you see that the kitchen was straight ahead. So it seems like it wouldn't have been too hard to have someone just, there in the kitchen waiting with the gun. Because another really, really big issue with Alex's story, and I think the primary sticking point, in my opinion, here you have an officer, he's interviewing Alex about the incident. And one thing I didn't catch until this past month when I was, started preparing for this, I hadn't caught that that in Alex's story, Lori, I had caught that Lori had already left with the kids, but I hadn't put together that in his story, he left and got the gun when it was just the two of them in the living room. So he claims that Charles hit him in the head with the bat, and then he goes to the back of the house, which if you watch the video of the officer walking through the house, I mean, it's not, I mean, it wasn't like the palatial dwellings that they were used to, but it's not a small house. That would have taken a significant amount of time. And so one, why in the world would Charles have just waited there for him? It makes no sense. So according to Alex, he ran back, he got his gun, then he came back, and he says that he tells, Charles again to drop the bat, and Charles comes at him again, and so that's when he shot him. And so that whole story, it just doesn't make sense. Charles would have hightailed it out of there. I don't think that, in their stories, no one accounted for if Charles knew that Lori had left with the kids. So if this story had even been true up to this point, Charles would have been thinking like, okay, this is my opportunity. He had his keys. He would have just gone to the car and taken off with JJ. And, at this point, I mean, a significant amount of time had passed because the call isn't made until, or police aren't dispatched until 8:36. So that's almost an hour after Charles arrived. That may have been an hour because, Lori was kind of fudging on if it was, 7:30, 7:35, 7:40. So we're talking right around an hour, and that's just not conceivable. Like Charles would have at that point been like, okay, I just need to get out of here. Like this is my break. And then also police even asked Alex why he didn't just stay in the room. And so initially I was thinking that in his story, Lori and the kids were there. And so, he thought he needed to protect them. But no, according to his story, once again, when he left to go get the gun, it was just the two of them. So there's absolutely no reason for Alex to have come back out and, and to challenge Charles some more and tell him to drop the bat. Like, what would he care if Charles had a bat at that point? Ace beats a two every time. And so again, and the officer, even kind of challenges him on it, but then also sort of feeds him the answer. Like, did you just not think about it? And Alex was like, yeah, it never entered my mind. But when the officers are talking about it later, one of the officers notes that, like, he said that Alex was like, fuck that. He goes back, gets the gun, comes back, and he notes, doesn't stay in the room, doesn't call 911. And so that, to me, even, with just the sheer number of contradictions, the sheer number of issues, like Lori's absolutely unbelievable account of what happened, all of these other issues. I mean, it really comes down to it just makes no sense why Alex wouldn't have why he wouldn't have stayed in the room, called 911. You sure pull the gun out, lock the door and be on the alert. But anyway, so again, I'm not trying to wreck anyone's day in Chandler Police Department, but I do hope if there's anything good that can come of this, I just hope that, law enforcement can learn from this. There are undertones all throughout this story of white privilege. We haven't even touched on that. You see the officer, getting him water, calling him sir. The officers kind of chatting him up in the car. They're talking about drugs. They're not talking about drugs. They're talking about trucks. The officer had already known somehow that he traveled back and forth between Arizona and Arkansas. And so I'm looking through that, you know, I did a search on the dashboard. I see no reference to Arkansas. So I was like, no, that's curious. How did he know to even ask him that? So, you know, we don't know what was redacted from these videos. We do know that, like, there's one point where an officer tells another officer to turn his camera off. Now, that might have been because someone else's body cam was already running. I don't know. But I just thought that that was, you know, just kind of a curious thing. But, you know, but you just see, like, even in this one video, and again, at some point I just had to be like, okay, we can't go till midnight here. But you see where the officer comes out and tells Alex he's going to drive him to the station. And Alex, like, puts up his hands, like, as almost like a prompt to the officer, like, oh, you can search me. At that point, he had not been searched. Like, he had just been asked if he had a weapon, and they just took his word for it that he didn't have a weapon, that he left it in the bedroom. And, you know, and so then the officer even kind of jokes with him, like, yeah, let me, you know, make sure you're not, you know, you don't have a grenade on you. And Alex giggles like the Pillsbury Doughboy. And, you know, and so it's, and again, I don't know how much of this is within the bounds of protocol, but it does make me wonder, like, you know, again, I'm not trying to cause controversy, and yet this issue of white privilege, I mean, this was, you know, a higher income neighborhood. I don't know the demographics on it, but, you know, here you have, you have these people, they're both Lori and Alex. Like, I might just do a YouTube live on just their absolutely bizarre reactions to this death, because we've seen the video and a lot of people have talked about how bizarre Lori's reaction, where she's like, sorry, neighbors, but Alex's reaction was equally as glib. And just even the tone that he takes when he's talking to the officers, he's like, yeah. Oh, no. You know, I mean, he's just like dismissive. He's like so casual. Even when he calls 911, he's just like, I'm just reporting, you know, this shooting. I shot my brother-in-law. The operator asked if he wanted to do CPR, and he was like, hard pass. And he's like, no, I don't know how to do that. And she's like, I could walk you through it, you know. But he's so calm and so just like cavalier, even in like his interactions with police. And I think that I think to a large degree, these officers were really snowed by, you know, it's just kind of like, never let them see you sweat, you know. So you have Lori and Alex, you know, treating this so casually. And I do think that the officers were kind of caught up in that, at least to some degree, because, you know, I just doubt if this had been a person of color who shot and killed someone, that this whole scene would have gone down anywhere near what it did. But that aside, you know, this was a gateway murder, because once, I believe, once Charles was out of the picture, you know, Joe was already out of the picture. Both the dads, you know, were out of the picture, and Lori was free to do whatever she wanted with the kids. And, you know, and now we know from the timeline that Tylee was gone in under 2 months, and JJ just over 2 months later. So anyway, that's all I have. I'm going to hang out a little bit in the chat, but fair warning, YouTube is not going to let me remove the, you know, like, I can't edit the video in any way, because as soon as I hit publish, NBC is going to hit me with copyright claims. They never hurt my channel. I'm well within copyright, you know, the boundaries of copyright, I believe, but they're automated. And so if your video has a copyright claim, you can't edit the video at all. So what I've been doing is just adding in the description, I will add links to different parts of the video. So I'll look to see, the different sections and link to that. And then I'll let you know when we start the comments, because this is going to be a longer video. And some people will see it and be like, I don't have, 3 hours of my life to give to this. That would certainly be me. But anyway, so I'm just going to review some questions. If you do have a question, one thing I would ask is if you could put it in all caps. I know I make fun of boomers for doing that. I'm not a fan of writing the caps lock button, but in this case, it will help to have questions stand out a little bit more. Okay. Okay. Sarah, let me see your comment. What? This, my laptop. My laptop's about to die. Oh, okay. The time I'm finished doing these videos. Okay. Alex Cox was found dead a day after Tammy Daybell was exhumed. Oh, and it disappeared. I think he wanted to go. Maybe. Poisoning it's not a typical way for anyone to go, men or women. So that was a pretty awful way to go. His karma and all that. But I think he was poisoned. Did you ever see Lori give JJ sleep medicine? No. That is not something she would have done in front of me. Did Lori seem normal when you visited her in Tylee? Wow, that is, man, that's $100 question right there. So I've explained this a little bit, so I won't go too much into it. But yes and no. So when I had visited there before, when the kids were younger, we had a lot of fun. We shared several vacations, one where I was with Lori and Joe, and 2 with the kids, one when she was married to Joe and one when she was married to Charles, because I wanted to maintain a relationship with Tylee. And, especially the vacation with Lori and Charles. I was in Florida. I was living in Florida at the time. So we just drove to where they were. It wasn't very far. And that was a lot of fun. But there were red flags, and enough that one of my kids in particular had some issues with, it was just something that happened between her and Lori. And so that's her story to tell. But now in looking back, I'm like, yep, she called it. And so there was that. And there was also, I'm not deliberately trying to be, coy or anything, but there was something that Lori had said that it was a concern to me. It was an allegation she had made against one of the kids, and there were kids everywhere there. All the kids were on this vacation, and it was an allegation that she had made against one of the kids, and it required kind of these strict sleeping patterns and stuff. And that for me really, really concerned me. It was just more that it just seemed like there were just a couple times where there were topics of conversation that I was just like, yep, I'm not in Kansas anymore. Not that I've ever lived in Kansas, but I kind of felt like I'm not super straight edge, but I felt that way, hanging out with them, because some of the stuff that she was talking about. And at that point, she was already really obsessed with my brother and these allegations that he had sexually abused Tylee and also Colby. And so, It's so for the most part, the vacation was a lot of fun in that we had a lot of really, really fun activities. And my kids mostly remember the vacation as a very positive thing. And Charles and Lori were both extremely generous, so it was like, I would say probably 85-90% just sheer fun, like the ideal kid vacation. But then that little part that wasn't fun, it was just like, yeah, I am not, this isn't something I want to have to worry about with my kids. But, yeah. So, but there was something that I had read when all of the documents were released about my Lori's and my brother's divorce that I was like, oh, I recognize that one. So, again, I'm not trying to be cryptic, but these were kids. I would never tell anyone what this allegation was, because it was just an allegation. I had no idea, but I was just like, well, I don't want to have to worry about this. Okay. Any chance Lori was projecting the sexual abuse onto your brother? Possibly. I have wondered if, I don't know. This dynamic between Lori and Alex is just so weird. I actually am not in the camp that they had like a sexual relationship as adults, but I do wonder if part of, what she had on him to like bring, to elicit this undying loyalty. I wondered if he did something to her as a kid. But again, that's pure conjecture. She never said anything about it. One thing I do think was interesting, though, and this might be a factor of my memory, but I have very specific memories of her talking about different siblings, even her sister who died. She never told me. I don't think she ever told me about the baby who died, but I have specific memories of her talking about Summer. I knew that there had been like some big fight between them, and so like I even knew about her niece Melanie. I knew she really, really loved Melanie. She talked about her very highly. Talked about how she was like a second mom to her after her mom died, Stacy. And so, I have these memories, and Adam, her one older brother, was on the vacation in Florida with us, so I knew Adam, and I knew his son, Zach. But I don't ever remember her ever mentioning Alex, which now in looking back, I just think like I knew that there were 5 kids, but I don't remember her ever saying anything about him, except that, there was this kind of one veiled reference where I was talking about someone who was like harassing me and stuff. And she actually told me, she was like, if this gets bad, I know a guy. And I just thought that was so funny because, she like lived in this mansion in the burbs. And I was just like, a guy who, like, is he a badass with a bunch of like parking tickets he hasn't paid? Like, what kind of guy could you know? And so when all this happened, I was like, oh my God, was she like referring to Alex? But, if that's what, and she wasn't kidding. Like, I can honestly say she wasn't kidding. I laughed it off just because that's just not in my, repertoire. Like, I don't have friends who are like, hey, if it gets too bad, let me know. I'll go all Tanya Harding on him, or whatever. That's just not in my in my realm of experience. So I took it lightly, but she was quite serious. Okay. This trip was long before my brother died. So the trip was the last one in Florida was in 2007, and my brother died in 2018. Narcissists blow through people. Oh my gosh. This is, and if anyone's part of True Crime Underground, you'll know I say this all the time. Like, I think every single adult should, like, you turn 18, congratulations, happy birthday. Here are 2 reading assignments. One is The Sociopath Next Door, and the other one is The Body Keeps the Score. This Body Keeps the Score. That's my daughter in the background. The Body Keeps the Score helps explain, the factors like childhood trauma and things like that that could make us vulnerable to the wiles of a sociopath. And I don't know where you cross the line from narcissist to sociopath. It seems like a sociopath is much more malignant, but yeah, she's both. If you imagine a Venn diagram, she's just total overlap. Do you think Lori was a psychopath, or it took her meeting Chad to light the match? So the best interview I've done to date, it never aired, but it was the only interview that was like actually cathartic. It was therapeutic. And the woman who interviewed me, Amy Roadblock, I think her name was, with 2020, she was absolutely phenomenal. Before we even interviewed, I just let her know, like, we were waiting for them to set everything up, and I just let her know, I'm a terrible interviewee. I'm not being humble. I used to be a reporter. I'm telling you, I'm a really bad interviewee. And so she asked me, like, why I thought that, or what made me about interviewing. And I was just like, as I'm talking about it, like, I'm seeing these pictures, and so my eyes go all over the place. I call them crazy eyes, and then just like the emotion, like, now things are kind of settling down, and I'm starting to feel more normal. But not to say I'm on the other side, but it's, I'm getting back to homeostasis a little bit. And, but at the time I was just so raw. And I think that was the last interview I did, because I was just like, I'm sorry, Tylee, I can't do this. I'm going to stick with data. But she let me know that there were things that she could do, like, to help me. And when we were just like chatting, she asked me this question. She asked if I thought that Lori had become a sociopath, or if she had been a sociopath all along. And I was already really grappling with that question. And so she asked me if she could ask it in the interview. When I'm just like talking casually, I had my wits about me and stuff. So I was like, sure, I'll think about how to answer it, because I'm still not exactly sure. And then she saved it for last. And I answered the question, and I fell on the side of, yes, I think she was a sociopath all along. But I didn't catch it. I didn't even know what a sociopath or a psychopath. I knew what a psychopath was, but I didn't know until I read the book, The Sociopath Next Door. Like, it's the next door element. Like, these are people, like, you most likely have worked with sociopaths. You most likely have had a boss who's a sociopath. Like, you most likely I don't know if most likely, but for many of us, there are sociopaths in our families. Like, they are so prevalent. And so when I actually read the book, now I wasn't thinking about Lori at the time I read the book. I read the book, I think, several years after our vacation, or maybe right after our vacation. But anyway, so now I kind of fall on the side of, I think that she was a chameleon all along. I think as a sociopath, I think she finds people's weak points. Like, for me, because my brother was so open about our family, like, I was like a closet former foster, like, even very, very close friends didn't know I grew up in foster care. And when I would go to conferences, I had a system with my kids where I would be like, if questions started going toward family or whatever, I would just text them and be like, someone call me. And I'd be like, oh, you know what? Sorry, guys, I'll catch you, tomorrow. I mean, I just had all these systems to be able to, dodge questions about family and stuff. But anyway, so, but Joe was very open about our family and coming from foster care and stuff. So when I met her, she knew a lot about me, and she knew I was the youngest of 5. I grew up in a separate foster home from my siblings. And so, I felt very much, like not joined at all to this family. I was 2 months old when we went into foster care. I saw them twice a year, one time just for a few hours, the other time for a week. They were much older than I was. I mean, there were just all these elements. And she seemed to know that. And she became like the perfect sister. I had 1 sister, 3 brothers. And my sister didn't like me at all. And or didn't act like she liked me. And she died young. But I didn't kill her. I'm not a Cox family member. And she died at 35 of a heart attack. But she had a number of health issues from, yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know where I was going with this. I got all tangled up in it, but so, Lori comes into the picture, and she's so fun, and she was so spontaneous. And I remember meeting her for the first time, and I put the pictures out there. Like, I felt like I was like with this celebrity couple. People were just like checking them out and, trying to figure out if they knew them or whatever, because they were just like this gorgeous couple. And so, she was just fun. And I can honestly say, because I don't like cloying sentiments. I could never be a Hallmark writer, but I had never seen my brother so happy. He had always been, kind of a little on the dark and broody side, and like sarcastic and all that. And then she was just like all, sunshine, sugar, spice, everything nice. And so he was like deliriously happy, like almost, Tom Cruise level, jumping up and down on the sofa. And so, I had just never seen him like that. And so that caused me to drop a lot of guards. But then, yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I think she's been a sociopath all along. I think though that when she and Chad met, it was just, like a chemical romance. I think they just, brought the worst out in each other. All right, let's see here. What are your thoughts on Lori wanting to join trials and Chad being against it? I don't even know what to think. Honestly, I'm waiting for someone for the temperature and the pressure to get high enough that I think we're kind of hitting a point of volatility. And I'm just waiting for someone involved in this to have enough pressure applied that they're just going to flip. And I think then things are going to get really interesting, because I think they all have stuff on each other. All the players who were involved either, through acts of omission or commission. So I like seeing Chad try to distance himself from Lori. And, I do really love the fact that his attorney is so unlikable. As annoying as it is, I'm like, yes, an attorney, because if Chad had been smart, he would have hired a woman or someone who's, has a high EQ, emotional quotient, and someone who could make him look more human, because he doesn't look human, and it doesn't help him at all. The way he sits there just creepily staring ahead, like there are times I look at him and I'm like, how did you go from missionary to this? Like total creepster, so he really needed someone who would, who could kind of humanize him to a jury, because there are going to be women on this jury. There are going to be moms, and men are obviously also, I think, going to be very off put by him, because they're just going to be like, yeah, poor excuse of a man. But yeah, so I think he's I think he's sweating bullets, and I think, his attorney is more aggressive. But I think both attorneys most likely know that these could become death penalty cases. And I've been told if that's the case, they won't even be qualified to represent them. I think they'll both probably end up with, just whatever they can get from the state. But anyway, so I really don't, all that to say, I don't know what to make of it. If I had my druthers, I hope that Lori turns on Chad, just because this is a time where it's like, okay, Lori, yeah, pull out the claws, like, let us know everything, because she's so scorched earth, like she'll just take the ship down and be like, ha, right before, she drowns. Okay. Did Lori ever display signs of physical aggression toward her kids? No, not at all. Even in the 2018 visit, that was problematic. No, Tylee had a much, much stronger personality than Lori did. And so, Lori kind of more like placated, and Lori was more aggressive in like the way she talked about Joe, like the allegations she would make. Like, she had no filter. She like one time shared something. It was so gross. I would never share. It was just absolutely disgusting. And I just said, Lori, no, it was way too far. And Tylee was right there. She wasn't in the room, but I've talked about this in the group, in the True Crime Underground group, that Tylee had this very unusual habit of kind of hovering. And I even like had a diagram to show people where she hovered, because like we would be, like pull out a snack or whatever, bring it to the table and like hang out at the table and talking. And Tylee was like the next room over, but like kind of stood in front of the hallway. But sometimes she was standing there for quite a while. And I was just like, why? It was so uncomfortable, because she would be talking about Joe. So there were other things. Now, if Lori started talking about any of her religious stuff, Tylee pieced out. She would just go to her room and hibernate there. Tylee was LDS and had a very strong faith, but she didn't like any of the end time stuff. And Lori had never talked about the end time stuff until that 2018 visit. But all that to say, she was abusive in the way she would talk about Tylee's dad. And, I was very surprised to find out in the court documents, more than 1,400 pages of court documents that were released, that Tylee never made an outcry against her dad. So she just quietly took that. And so, something let Tylee know, though she pushed back on a lot of things, she didn't push back on that. And so, nope, there was nothing. And in fact, I can honestly say, though there was definitely friction between Lori and Tylee, and I've talked about that. I've written about that. I've been very open about some of these dynamics. Lori was very affectionate and appropriate with JJ. She spoke very highly of him, and she and Charles both were very good about helping him recalibrate when he would start to kind of have a meltdown. I knew Bailey really, really helped JJ when he would, start to get upset. And also he had these iPad programs, so it's interesting because that's like a detail, like when Charles was writing about, Lori keeping JJ's iPad. You know, it seems like, oh, well, why quibble over that? And yet, like, it had a lot of apps that JJ used to somehow, you know, kind of get back to homeostasis. So, but no, they were both very loving toward him. There was one time where Lori made a comment about Charles traveling a lot, and a lot of the weight and responsibility for JJ's care, which, you know, was a lot, that falling on her. So, you know, I could pick up on some resentment toward Charles, but, you know, overall, like, even they interacted normally. There was nothing, I mean, aside, you know, there was nothing in how she treated the kids, but especially physically, that would have been alarming to me. Someone said, boot Suzanne out. I don't know what kind of drama she's causing, but yeah, if she's a Karen, get her out. Yeah, I probably don't want to know what this Karen had to say. But my moderators are awesome, and if they're in here, they'll get her out. Yeah, death penalty certified. Yeah. Quite a few public defenders in those countries are excellent attorneys and have done death penalty cases. Okay. Do you believe Lori and Chad had a hand in Alex's death? Personally, yes, I do. Yeah, I mean, you know, you hear where Melanie Gibb tells Lori about what Alex said about how no one would find the kids, and she didn't want to know, or JJ, and she didn't want to know where JJ was, and then, you know, the next thing you know, again, if the Reddit email is to be believed, and it has been a very reliable source of insider information, not totally reliable, because there are some things like, I just don't know about Lori meeting Chad in September. I think it was September 23rd. But overall has been very reliable. And yeah, so but it mentioned that that Alex had been identified as a zombie. So I just thought that was really interesting. Here he was, like, you know, ostensibly the family hitman, you know, doing all of Lori's dirty work, and then it was just like, okay, but yeah, now you're a risk. So yeah, personally, I suspect, I wonder, I'll say that to be safe, I wonder if Joe, Alex, and Tammy met with similar demises. How do I feel about change of venue? It doesn't matter to me. You know, it'll be easier to fly into from New York. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think they're spitting into the wind, because, you know, like, they can go to the hills in Tennessee, and, you know, I mean, even if they find people who, you know, claim they're not familiar with the case, I think that's a big ask. And, you know, and two, I mean, it's such a horrific crime if they're not biased against them, you know, before the trial starts. They probably will be by the end of day one, you know. So yeah, sure, whatever you need to do to burn through the retainer. No, it had to be a male attorney for worthiness in LDSI's jurors. Maybe, I don't know. I think also, you know, he's just a misogynist, you know. like as in this case, like sometimes I pick up on like little things and they just kind of stick with me. Anything that's like kind of outside the scope of what I would consider, kind of normal behavior, the gerbils just kind of run in their cage. And one thing that I thought was so interesting was the dynamic between Chad and Melanie Gibb, that he could just call her and be like, when Rexburg police call, don't pick up. And she didn't pick up, And so, again, you just don't know what all these people have on each other. So, and then that seems to be a consistent thing for Lori. Like, she makes sure that everyone whose support and loyalty she needs, that she has something on them, And so, I don't know if, it's definitely a concern that Melanie and David Warwick were there in Rexburg, in Lori's home, when JJ was murdered. That's obviously very problematic, and we don't know what Lori has. I mean, that call between Melanie and Lori that went south, I thought was supremely interesting, because I have a whole theory about that. I won't get into it. But yeah, I think it went south. I personally think that this call was contrived. I think that most likely, if I had to put money down on something, I would say Melanie, they have all these burner phones, so they had plenty of ways to communicate. And I think that Melanie probably told Lori, listen, you threw me under the bus, you owe me this. And so, but I think I personally think that the conversation probably went south when Melanie started preaching, and then that's when it like turned into this cat fight. But I do think it was very interesting, the tension between them, and I mean, I have my issues with it, like why Melanie never brought up Tylee's name, and whatever. I have my issues with that call. Like, you have one kid who is definitely missing, and another one who the story is just absolutely not believable. A 16-year-old with a GED isn't going to, get accepted at BYU, and you can't even stay on campus until you're 17. And why would she live on campus when they were literally 1 mile up the street in student housing, married student housing, according to Melanie Pulowski? And, why would Tylee's car be home? Why wouldn't they have stopped by? So there are all these issues that I have with that call. But I think it was really interesting, the cat fight at the end, where, they're just like, they're calling each other honey, but it's just like, and Melanie's like, oh, honey, we're not talking about that, or, something like that. When Lori's like, hey, basically, what about you banging David? But anyway, so, yeah, so I just, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this case isn't just dark. I mean, obviously, on a personal level, it's extremely dark. But then, just having watched as much true crime as I have, like, I've never seen a case with this many, like, really bizarre elements. And one element they're like tributaries, like it feeds into the next river. And so, like, you're just like left, because the public, I mean, we don't have access to a whole lot. And every once in a while, someone kind of tosses something over the fence at me, but I never know how reliable anything is. And, but anyway, but yeah, so there are so many bizarre elements to this case that it at some point, it's like, everything is so dependent on so many other factors that if, earlier on in the flow of information, if you get a piece wrong, then it's going to affect all of your other assumptions. So I just really, really don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure if your name is pronounced Moni or Moni, Moni B. You you wrote, I truly think she, referring to Lori, I assume, is so delusional that she thinks she can manipulate her way out of it. I actually don't totally agree with that. I think she knows on some level that she's hosed. I do think that she is, kind of buffering her conscience with a lot of, like really crazy spiritual delusions. Those may erode over time as the reality hits her that like this, she might not leave, a lockdown environment, and except for in a box. So some of that may kind of wash away over time as reality hits a little harder. But I thought it was interesting, the article that Nate Eaton did about the woman who was with Lori for, I think, 4 days. She was in her pod, and I think maybe even her cell. And people were commenting about like, what a monster, because she wasn't crying. This woman noted that, she wasn't crying. She wasn't, she seemed self-assured. She was talking to Colby for almost 2 days straight, which I was kind of surprised that they have like that many privileges, and that like they have a pod and there's like a TV and stuff. So obviously I'm listening to that and going, yeah, that's too nice. That's too much. But anyway, she may not experience those same privileges in state prison, but yeah, so people were commenting on that, and I just wonder how much of that was an act, because she knew that this woman wasn't going to be there forever, and so I think I think she is delusional to some capacity. I seriously doubt that she's insane. I think she is a malignant narcissist. I think she's a sociopath. And I personally think that she got away with murder with my brother, which fanned this appetite for it. I think she realized, like, wow, she worked every asset she had and she got away with it. Like she went into Gilbert, she glided right through that. She didn't show up for the mandatory, 72-hour hold. There was no, she didn't pass anything with flying colors. I'm inclined to believe the court documents that Charles filed that Community Bridges said, no, she was a no-show. And so, and no one enforced that. In fact, one of the officers circled back 9 different times. Well, told her how she could avoid the mandatory 72-hour hold, and then circled back on it 8 more times. So 9 times total, and at one point even says to her, how we are going to make this go away, I don't know. And I was like, how did you become we? Like, how did you become Team Lori? Within the first minute of the interview, she contradicted herself. It gave 3 different explanations for how Charles got into her car. The first minute of sitting, like coming into the room and sitting down, like she couldn't get her story straight. So there were like so many red flags in that whole interview. She just glided right through it, with her siren song. They just all seemed to be caught up. Even when the rookie caught that, like, she had an iPhone because he recognized the distinct ring, and she had said she had like a cheap flip phone, and he was like, I assume that, or that's your, I think he said something to the effect of, I assume that's your daughter's. Well, Tylee was sitting right next to her, so that's probably not a safe assumption that she would have, Tylee's phone. And then Lori just, fast on her feet because she has no boundaries. She'll say anything, anything that's expedient to get her out of any situation. She's like, oh no, this is my mom's phone, and blah 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 blah. So yeah, I don't know. I think to some degree she is delusional, but I think now she I think she has to look in the mirror and say, I don't have my primary asset anymore, and no one's charmed by me. And she's not even trying to act charming, which that was one of the things that was really surprising to me the first time I saw her in court in Hawaii. I mean, I was beside myself at the time, but I was just like, wow, how did she go from so like charismatic to just like double guns world? I don't care about any of this. I'm rolling my eyes. I'm copping all this toward the judge. You know, the judge is asking me to speak up. I'm not going to speak up. My attorney has to tell me to answer the questions. I mean, it was just absolute. It was insanity. And so I was just like, I think at this point she has succumbed to like, she's not getting out of this one. So my opinion. Chad the Sexton. Yeah, someone said Lori wants to sit in court with Chad. I did think it was extremely interesting that one hearing they had where they would have been together, at least like, you know, on iPads or whatever, like they would have seen each other, and she pieced out, you know, so I wouldn't have called that one, but I wonder if, you know, she was just like extremely self-conscious of how she looked, you know, because she wears those like giant masks. I mean, it's like basically her eyes show and then it like comes under her chin. Like, you know, I live in the city. I'm around thousands of people. I've never seen anyone wear a mask that big, you know. So I do wonder if, you know, she was concerned that like if Chad, you know, saw her, you know, I don't know, in her current condition with her face melting, you know, off her head, if he might have second thoughts, you know, and think maybe the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. My daughter just said gross. What do I think about Colby talking to Lori in jail for hours? I don't know what to think. I mean, I don't know. I can't figure this family out. Like, and I'm not going to try. I haven't walked in his shoes. You know, I don't know. I mean, I know that from the time he was a little boy, when I first met him, he was very, very close to his mom. And so I just don't know. But, you know, she obviously, you know, she wasn't going to share with him about the kids, you know, so I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a therapist. But I honestly hope that, you know, that Colby gets help through this. You know, he lost his entire family in one fell swoop, you know. And so, I mean, this is devastating. And I'm like twice Colby's age. I've had more experience, probably more than twice his age. But I don't know. Yeah, I'm more than twice his age. And, you know, I've had more experience. I've been through therapy, you know, and so so I do know that the FBI offers a service because one of the victims advocates was like, do you need counseling? And I was like, are you following me on Facebook or something? Because like I had just finished just an hour before, like going at it with some Karen. But anyway, so I joke, but you know, she was just like touching base with me. But I did think like, oh, this is good. This would be really good for, you know, yeah. I hope that I really, really, really hope that this younger generation of Coxes can like break this cycle of just trauma and drama and, you know, like all of the craziness that they, you know, grew up with. I did. So I hope they do. Talk about Zulema. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I was surprised when I can't think of the YouTuber's name. He's awesome, but he went to her door and was trying to get an interview, and she called the cops on him. And this is going to be petty, but one of the issues I have with this whole group and these different family members, I'm like, what is up with like all of these like little teeny tiny mousy voices, And I'm probably not one to talk that much because, like, I've been told I have a 12-year-old's voice. And back when I had a home phone, like telemarketers, twice. Someone asked to talk to my mom. I just said, "Oh, she's not here," But anyway, but the people in this group have these like Lori and even her sister, and like I don't know if it's like a cultural thing or what, but they all have these itty bitty voices. So I was curious what Zulema's voice sounded like, because like coming from a Hispanic background, I have a lot of Hispanic friends, and I used to take Zumba, and like just going into diners with these women afterwards. Like we went to 2 main diners. They put our group in the very back of both of the diners because they are loud and proud, and anyway, so it was always like a great time, but it was raucous. So I was just kind of curious like about her voice, because I was like, I don't think that this would be like a cultural thing for her. And then you hear this itty bitty tiny voice, and I was just like, what is going on? Is this like just women trying to diminish themselves as much? Yes, it was Tyson Draper. Thank you, Kathy. And I just happened to look up. But anyway, so so her role, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Like, if you read Ian's document, and I've said consistently, I think like if you really want to get an overview of this case, read Ian Pawlowski's bizarre documentation of this group's beliefs, and he even broke it down into an outline. And being like a very organized kind of thinker, and like when I wrote my book, my outline was 56 pages because I put everything into an outline. So when I saw this outline, I was like, okay, dude, you're too smart for this. How did you get caught up in this? But the details about Zulema are very weird in both of these documents. Like she and Alex, were supposedly like stirring up hurricanes in Vegas, and they got married in Vegas, and just hearing how like the person who owned the chapel described their ceremony as cold and businesslike and all this stuff, and he was her 6th husband. I did think it was funny that Melanie Pawlowski said that she's just trying to grieve the loss of her husband. And I was like, her husband of what, like weeks. And but anyway, so and he was in Rexburg right up until Thanksgiving. He went back to Phoenix, and then like it looks like they just had like Thanksgiving dinner and then headed off to Vegas with Ian and Melanie to go get hitched. So there's a very weird dynamic of everyone just kind of reshuffling and ending up with someone in this group. But like her whole history of like being a professional cuddler and stuff, I'm like, why not? Like what just round it all off. I don't know if she played a role in Alex's demise, but I do hope that they chase it down. I hope that like every single rock is overturned and they get to the bottom of it. Because I have, seen where people have said, I don't care if Alex was murdered. I do, not because, I think it was very karmic. I thought it was interesting to hear him say like, nah, basically hard pass on, giving Charles CPR. And I think, I personally think that he just stood there and waited for Charles to bleed out. That was one of the reasons so much time passed. I also think that the reason that Lori was so, kind of quibbling over the exact time that Charles got there, I think she was afraid that someone might have heard the gunshots. And so, and so that's one of the ways that people will get caught, lying about, because sometimes if someone hears something, especially multiple gunshots, they'll look at their watch, or they'll, kind of remember what they were watching on TV at their time, or, that they were in a particular app and they can pinpoint the time. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, she's just one more really kind of bizarre character who's now just trying to, backpedal. I thought it was interesting that she said to the police officer that that one of the reasons she didn't want to do the interview was she was going to be meeting with law enforcement. I think in a matter of days, so you never know with these people if they're telling the truth. But, I know, she lawyered up early on. At least she was smart enough not to go out and do interviews. Although I have to say, as a family member, I largely am very grateful that these people did interviews, even though it was very painful at times, because I think these different people doing interviews have brought, shed more light on some of the bizarre elements. Do you think the kids were killed because they witnessed Charles' murder? In part, yes. I think it was probably a combination of, both of them would have been difficult to control for different reasons. JJ, a function of his autism is he would kind of get caught in these cycles of saying, some of the same things. He was very communicative. So he wasn't like a non-communicative, person on the spectrum. But he was cyclical, and so, I did wonder if perhaps he, maybe saw something or heard something or, heard whatever. I mean, he just catches on to little things and will say them repeatedly. It was notable that he and Tylee weren't killed. They weren't murdered at the same time. So it made me wonder, was Lori going to try to make things work with JJ? Yeah, I think there's that element. Tylee especially would have been difficult to control, and I'm sure there would have been a lot of resentment brewing over her lying for her mom. And then there wasn't even the insurance money, so it's like, oh, great. Now we, have to, live in an apartment in Rexburg. I mean, who knows? But there was already so much friction between Tylee and Lori that, I could not see their relationship, surviving something like this. But then I think there was just the element of, I just wonder how much Chad just wanted her to himself. So I think they both played a role in it. I think she was more motivated by greed, and he was more motivated by, I think this is my time to have what I want, with this beautiful vixen. When is Melanie Pulaski's baby due? I don't know. She might have had the baby by now. I'm not sure. It was last I heard it was September. I thought it was early September, but I could be wrong about that. We're not exactly Facebook friends. Have I thought about, is it safe for Melanie and Ian Pulaski's baby? That's a tough one. I mean, in one regard, the family, not to be crude, but the family hitman is dead. And then, everyone's living under a magnifying glass and will most likely for the rest of their lives. I mean, the people who were on the wrong side of history with this, it's interesting because you see like Tammy's family, they're not living with the shame. I'm sure they're living with a lot of pain, but, like they, so there are family members who, like, we're going to walk with a limp. Like, you don't walk through something like this. There are just so many layers upon layers upon layers of really, complicated dynamics, and then just, sadness. But with regard to Melanie, I think in some regards, I can't imagine her doing anything to harm the child. Yeah, I don't know. I can't imagine that their marriage is going to survive all of this. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. Not that I necessarily believe that they only dated for 9 days. I think most likely they were in the group. And really, I think the 9 days was just to keep her temple recommend, because it would have started the day after her divorce from Brandon was finalized. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, Cynthia, that's a really good question. She asked if I think that if the FBI has questioned Jason, meaning Jason Mao, he was a former police officer, Zulema, Gabe, Chris, Perrette, etc. I would imagine, especially anyone who's not lawyered up, even the ones who are, obviously they would have been there, and controlling how that went down. I think Chris, right from the start, like I blocked him pretty early on. I was in a group that he was in, and the guy was just a troll. Like, I was pretty disgusted when he came forward, like basically like, oh, woe is me, I was bamboozled just like everyone else. No, people were telling him, like, dude, because he was like giving a firsthand account, like telling people 100% these kids are safe. He can confirm this. And I mean, he was just bullshitting, like nonstop, trolling family, doing all these things, just being an absolute nuisance for months. And I mean, it was, in my opinion, it was all financially motivated. He had that little email list. I think people paid, $5 a month to hear Mormon creepypasta stories, and so I think he was just trying to keep that alive as long as he can, and always had an exit strategy, and was going to pull this, Scarlett O'Hara, move, and just, oh, please feel sorry for me as I go down with the ship. But, he's a scoundrel like the rest of them. Gabe, I focused on him just because I really do believe that he could have prevented all of this, except for my brother's death, if my brother was murdered, just by being honest, just by being a good guy and reporting honestly. But, if I had to say one way or another, I mean, like everything else about him, like it seems like he's kind of stayed out of the limelight. He's a bishop in the church and stuff. So I don't know if he just kind of got caught up in this. I'm not in any way trying to justify anything he did, because I think he is the quintessential coward. But then it seemed like it was like, once Charles was murdered, it seems, at least ostensibly, he kind of laid low. I wonder if he's had regrets, because he should. But yeah, so I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I really hope that, over time we're going to get more of the backstory, and that's typically what will happen. But sometimes that can take years, and then with this group, they lie so easily. Like it'll take, multiple, tell-all books and, deathbed confessions before we ever find out probably what's going on. I am hoping that they're as dumb as I think that they are, and just with how they treated technology. Okay, like, yeah, props for thinking like you were some gang and you had, all these disposable devices. But then this group just seems like the kind who would, then pay for them on their Amex. So, they definitely weren't, technically savvy. None of them were. And I knew that about Lori anyway. But so I'm hoping that they screwed up a lot, because, keep in mind the prosecution, here in New York, we have grand juries, so we don't have these preliminary trials that I'm aware of. But the prosecution only has to present enough evidence to be able to, take the to go to trial. And I think like Rob Wood brought so much more than probably what they needed. But there's a very good chance that if I had to call it, I would say he's holding some aces and some kings and some queens and, probably a full house, and so and I'm not an optimist, but I'm very much a realist. But, just from some of the things I've seen and, kind of how he plays his poker game, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we come up on the trial and it's just like boom, 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 just D-Day for these guys. I hope. Earthquakes, yeah, she is in that. Oh, that's right, it was earthquakes. I think I said hurricanes. Then, the Midwest experienced a hurricane, so yeah, who knows? Julie Rowe is part of this mess too. Yeah. I actually wonder with Julie if she thought she was going to be the Lori, just those exchanges between Julie and Chad. Like, are you still thinking that Tammy's going to die? Yep. How about you? Yep. That's bizarre. Like, if you even just took like individual elements of this story, because we have so many, we have this amalgam of all these like ridiculously exaggerated. Like if you went to a movie and it was a Stephen King movie and you had even half of these elements, you'd walk away going, that's crazy. That's too unrealistic. Like, yeah, like you can't combine all these elements, and yet they did. But so I don't know. I think, I just wonder if, Julie was hoping she would be the new Mrs. Daybell, and then, supported him for a little bit. And then, as soon as the ship started going down, she just, went for the limelight. And I don't know. I couldn't watch videos with her because there's nothing that she had to share that I had any interest in. I was just like, thanks, next. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, question. Do you know why Melanie did not like Tylee? She had some pretty strong reactions while up on the witness stand. So I do pick up on almost a disdain for both Tylee and JJ. Now, Tylee, she was very strong. She was very, she was opinionated, but not like, I think it was more like with people she knew. I'm not sure how much she, did that with people she didn't know, but she had RBF on lock. And so, I can imagine, because I didn't know if I was going to make it past the barriers between her personality and my personality, because I won't like push with teens like that. I've said this before, like teens are my favorite humans. Like I just absolutely love teens. It's weird. It was my favorite phase in parenting. I just really, really enjoy teens. But, like she was so shut down when I met her. And it was sad just because like, I'd flashed back to this, little girl who was just a will-o'-the-wisp and, with this commanding little walk and, just so curious and, just had this really, really delightful personality. And then, I hadn't seen her for, quite a few years. Like she was 4 and then she was 16. And so, so it was really sad when I saw just how shut down she was. And I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to make it past the barrier. I kind of made it in passes, and it was mostly just because like we started talking about memes and, like viral videos and hashtags and, and so we started like, kind of teasing each other more and like, showing Lori some of these ridiculous, viral videos and stuff. And so I was thrilled that I found common ground with her. But it would, like I've said this before, and I absolutely would not make this up, because one of the things that drives me nuts with crime shows is that, they can just get really cloying with some of their like last memories and stuff. But, and my last memory was, my last interaction with her was actually going to the airport, and I remember very little about it, but I think my mind just like latched onto that last night. So all that to say, it took some work to get past, some of some of Tylee's barriers. And rightly so. I mean, this girl, when I read those documents and, found out just like, more backstory about what this little girl experienced from a young age, like she was being interviewed about, sexual abuse from the time she was 3, just being poked and prodded and asked all these questions. And, her saying when someone asked if she knew who Joseph Ryan was, and she said, he was my old daddy, and, all this stuff is very, very heartbreaking. So any of us would have, these walls up. So all that to say, I could imagine, especially because Melanie and Lori shared this kind of bizarre, religious, not kind of, very bizarre, religious beliefs. And like I said, Tylee was LDS. She had a very strong faith. She, she had a picture of the temple as, up on Facebook, and, all of these different things, so she had a very genuine faith, but she didn't like any of the weird stuff. And she didn't like that Lori was talking to me about the end times. And I think she probably knew, because I'm very careful in what I say usually, but not as careful in like my expressions, and so they end up on my face, and, and so I'm sure Tylee, because she was hovering for all of that, I'm sure she saw, just how uncomfortable I was. And, and I told Lori, like, I don't know what I don't know what you want me to do. Like, I don't know what to do with this information, because interestingly, at that time, and this is why I don't believe that she met Chad before 2019. Some people believe that they had met probably years ago. I don't believe that story. First of all, the camping story, the guy who started it, he kept saying that he has this proof, but has never come forward with the proof. So, -10 right there. But I just know from my experience, albeit very limited experience, this was 5 days in April, but like with her pretty nonstop, that when she talked about the end times, one of the things that was so concerning to me is that she was so fearful. Like the last time she brought it up, this is when she made the cliff comment. You know, she was telling me about just how scary this was going to be. And so, you know, and that's when she said, you know, sometimes I wonder if it would be better just to put my kids in the car and go over the side of a cliff, something to that effect. And so that really was the end of our relationship. You know, she walked it back. She said she was just kidding. She said, you know, I've never hurt my kids, you know, but that's just not something like you don't, and I have gallows humor. I have dark Ryan humor, but that's just not something. She wasn't kidding at the time. You know, she was very, very serious. And she was trying to make a point to me, like, this is how scary it will be. So I think it's interesting that when she synced up with Chad, it seems like she then was no longer afraid of the end times, because now she was convinced that like this little cadre they had going on was going to, they were going to lead the end times, you know, with her and Chad being out in front, you know. And so it's just interesting to note this dichotomy, because, you know, I suspect she was reading Chad's book, and others have said that she was reading Chad's books for several years before she met him. I don't know, but she had never talked about the end times before this, and this time, up until she went too far, she was really, really hyper focused on it, you know. So I knew like something had happened, and I didn't know, because I know so little about the LDS faith. I know a little bit more just since, you know, reading so many posts and comments from people who are LDS. You know, now I realize, no, this isn't an LDS thing. This was, you know, Lori and Chad and this weird group thing. But anyway, so. Yeah. Oh, so getting back to Melanie. So, you know, I can imagine that there was friction between the two of them, and but the thing that was surprising to me is to note what I feel is disdain in her voice, the way she talks about JJ. So, you know, if you follow this case, like JJ is the golden child of this story. I mean, and I don't have that proclivity to, you know, only talk about people positively after they've passed. Like I remember them exactly as I did when they were alive. And that's been kind of jarring for some people sometimes, you know, because a lot of people, I think especially some older people, that's just kind of expected. Like you only talk about the positives. And I'm always like, then stick to Dateline, don't come into a Facebook group, you know. But that said, I just thought it was just so interesting to hear her talk about JJ, because everyone talks positively about JJ, and he really was delightful. You know, I've talked about how, you know, like you kind of run, like my memories of JJ, you kind of like ran in a parallel universe with him, and you didn't really always know like how much you were connecting, because he was just playing, and he ran a lot, like literally like in a circuit. That was just a function of his autism. And but there was this, you know, one time, but you could like play along with him, like you get in the pool with him and, you know, splash and, you know, that kind of stuff. But there was one time where Lori and I were in the kitchen, and he was running his circuit, and he got off of his circuit, ran into the kitchen, and just gave me this big hug, and then kept running, you know. And I laughed. I mean, it was so touching. But, you know, I told Lori, I was like, was that a drive-by hugging, you know? But I mean, it was so endearing. And then at night, he would ask Lori every night, you know, is Annie going to be here when I wake up, you know? And so you knew like he was aware of you, and, you know, and he was just, because he had no, like, the defenses that we're used to, you know, as kids get older, he was just who he was. And so I remember, you know, saying something to Lori, to the effect of like, wow, like how awesome to just live like that openly, because like you don't have anything kind of, causing you to shut down and stuff. So my point being, he has been the golden child, throughout the story. In fact, I never had any intention of coming forward. And I didn't for 6 weeks. But I felt like Tylee was getting lost in the story. And so I remember just kind of, I don't really talk to the dead. It was just kind of like out loud. I was like, sorry, kiddo. Like, it looks like I'm the best you got right now, and so I came forward with my timeline. I wasn't planning on doing interviews and stuff, and I probably should have stuck with that plan. But anyway, so yeah, that's why I came forward, and so it's notable to me that like when she talks about JJ, now of course, like I am studying tone, I'm studying, mannerisms and stuff, but like when she talks about JJ, there seems to be this derisive tone. She was like, well, even when she's saying he doesn't seem like a zombie, which, first of all, why are you even like giving this question any credence or this statement, but but like she was like, he just seems like, typical JJ to me, but there's just like when she's talking with, when she's talking about the group, even when she's talking about like Lori, she feels sad that her friend isn't going to be able to be beautiful and have nice things and, all these things. And she, refers to Chad as a good guy or good man or something like that, like, so, all of these things. And yet when she talks about JJ, like, yeah, and she may have only known him when he was, no, she would have known him when he was on his medication, so yeah, I mean, that's just an interesting dynamic there. And then to find out she also has a son who's on the spectrum, like I don't want to be cruel. I don't want, I have at times been very judgmental through this whole thing because I was just so angry, and but yeah, I'm not trying to be cruel toward Melanie. It's just there's a very, I really do think that all of these people, including David, so he's been kind of like the, in some people's minds, the standard bearer because supposedly he convinced Melanie after 10 days to, come forward. But yeah, even if you read his writings, like they are alarmingly very much this group. I mean, he's talking about like, I think 2 kids left the camp. Like, so he had all these prophetic visions and stuff, and 2 teenagers left the camp, and then like, like this white tent city and stuff. And then, the next day they were found dead. And, I mean, I like his visions of what he apparently genuinely thought was going to happen to our country. I mean, they're bizarre. Like he thought he was going to be burned at the stake and that he wasn't going to feel it. And, all of this stuff. I mean, like the whole group, I think they just it seemed like everyone kind of took a step back from anything that encumbered them in any way. And they were just, all like mission forward. And so kids just weren't a high priority. But, after Charles, with both of their dads dead, with both Charles and Joe, Lori was going to have these kids. And, most likely JJ, maybe for life. I don't know. I don't know how much he would have been able to care for himself. So, yeah, I don't know. When did the FBI get involved in these cases? It was right after the welfare check. So I think they probably got through the Thanksgiving weekend, and they didn't announce that the FBI was involved. They didn't announce the case until, later in December. I think like December 19th, maybe. But they asked the FBI right away, which, in my opinion, I think Rexburg has really been like the hero of this story, in so many ways. Like, they just, they took it seriously. They brought in extra help. They realized, what, we're in over our heads, and same with Fremont County, like bumping it up to the state prosecutor's office and stuff. So, it's just interesting to see how totally differently Idaho has handled this case in comparison to Arizona. Now, Arizona, the law enforcement, to be fair, they didn't realize that it was going to turn into like this, case that had international scope and attention. But yeah, so yeah, they were involved very early on. I would suspect probably like the first Monday, after everyone got back from Thanksgiving. And also, I thought it was interesting that it looks like they immediately started pulling all the podcasts and listening to the podcast, because there's a link on my timeline where one of the, and in fact, I think all of this is referenced in my timeline, not the analysis in the timeline, because that's really just a collection of facts and citations. I don't weigh in too much with analysis every once in a while, but yeah, so before they announced it, they pulled their podcast, and one agent said, something to the effect of, it's far from, I forget the words he used, but yeah, I forgot, but like basically not happy stuff. So, and that was obviously very smart, because as soon as they, very soon after they announced the case, these members just started. It was like delete, shred, So at least we have the podcast with Jason, Mal, Lori, and Melanie. That, yeah, most of them are gone. Sarah asked if I know if Tylee was seen by a psychiatrist for her quote issues. All I know is what everyone else knows, from all the court documentations, and one thing that I noted is they had this list of questions. They were trying to assess risk, and in the list of questions, it was like, is there a custody battle? Is there this? Is there that? And they were all Boolean values. Yes, no, true, false. And one of the questions is, does the family have a history of going from basically practitioner to practitioner until they get the answer they want? And the person, whoever was doing this assessment, said yes. Again, I kind of like zero in on little details like that. So it does appear that she was getting psychiatric care, but it seemed to be with an explicit purpose of finding someone who would say, yes, we think that she was sexually abused. And from everything that I read, they didn't find that, and they found quite the opposite, that Lori needed a psych eval, which she did pass. I mean, I just think, oh my gosh, if Joe and Charles had been, if Lori and Chad had been subjected, especially Lori, to even a modicum of the scrutiny that Joe was subjected to, and rightly so. Like, I am not in any way dismissing sexual abuse allegations, and I've said from the beginning, it's not my place to, defend or, or accuse Joe. Like, there were two people who knew the truth, and now one of them is dead, and there's one person who knew the truth, and we don't even know how much how much Kobe has been impacted by all of this. I think he was 11 when the second round of allegations were made, pretty long after their divorce. So, we don't know, but I never want to dismiss that, especially as a survivor. But that said, there did seem to be a history of using psychiatrists more to her benefit, almost like they were working for her, than really, helping Tylee. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a criticism of the psychiatrist. They were just, performing a service. And it sounds like they didn't kowtow to her, but how much Tylee was actually helped by this psychiatric care, I kind of doubt it. I do think, there is a part of me, having known Tylee and having seen her from the time, she was a baby, like she was just under a year the first time our families got together. And she was very strong-willed, very, headstrong, absolutely adorable, so adorable. But you could tell. I even teased Joe. I was like, she is you. She was so her dad, in a lot of ways. Other ways, very different. But yeah, I don't know. I was kind of touched that here you have this 3-year-old who's being pressured to make this outcry. On through who knows how long, how many years she was subjected to this line of questioning. But at 3 was just like, nope. That doesn't necessarily absolve Joe. I do think the sum totality of those documents, the fact that nothing came out that implicated him, that I'm aware of, and I would imagine, there were a lot of people going through those documents, not just myself, but for her to have the fortitude of having this mother and these family members who are pressuring you to make an outcry, and at 3, she's like, no, that didn't happen, and then like kind of outs them. You can imagine, she's just like an innocent kid, and they're asking her, has anyone pressured you to say this? And she's like, yep, here are the names, But anyway, so yeah. I would imagine she really came to dread those sessions. I can't imagine having to answer all those questions from such a young age. Thoughts on the storage unit. So I actually did a post about the storage unit. So one thing that I thought was interesting with the storage unit, first of all, there was the question of why have the storage unit? Like, you have all this room, and Alex had a 3-bedroom townhouse, and when they did the welfare check, like, it was already cleaned out, and they didn't know when the welfare check was going to be, but who knows, maybe he and Salema had already made plans to get married. But yeah, so, first off, I'm like, well, you have this much room. Why have a storage unit? Like, you idiots, like, storage units are surveilled, so why would you do that? But it did make me, first of all, it made me wonder if they had, especially Lori, if she had people coming in from out of town who needed to see evidence of the kids and other people, because, we have these witnesses saying that both she and Chad had said she didn't have minor kids, so were they like gathering up all the kids' stuff for the people who, the thought she didn't have minor kids, and then putting it all back out again when, like, if that was her sister, Summer, in the Ring doorbell footage? I don't know. It's a very, very peculiar detail. but I wrote this post about it just because I noticed. So as an analyst, you look for clusters. You look for clusters in data. You look for clusters of like activity, and that's what I was doing with the storage unit. So I've curated this really massive timeline. And I was wondering if there were, I noticed that there were these clusters of activity. It's not like they were like consistently going to the storage unit and picking up stuff. And so these clusters coincided with different events. Like there was a cluster of activity right before, definitely right before, I think Tammy was shot at. I mean, it's been months since I've written that post. But, there were just all these like different clusters of activity, and they did coincide, at least somewhat loosely, with these different events. So I've wondered if Alex kept his gun in there. I mean, that would be very foolish, and that could account for why it misfired, or assuming that was him who tried to fire at Tammy, and then the gun appeared to have misfired. I don't know. I do remember that he was the one who went to the storage unit right before she was shot at. So I was just like, did he have the gun in a storage unit? I don't know. But yeah, I think maybe they just thought that they were going to be able to stay under the radar with that. I don't know. I mean, if so, then why not just pay the bill? Like, like stiffing the guy on the bill, just, that was like the perfect reason for him to reach out to law enforcement. But yeah, I don't know. But, like there was definitely that activity right before Brandon was shot at where, they're clearly carrying like the back seat, most likely to the Tylee's Jeep, and, and then they're putting it back, and, it's, yeah, I don't know. It's bizarre. It was very sad seeing the kids' stuff. When I saw I didn't think that the kids were alive from the start. And I'm not saying that as a weird flex. I mean, I remember watching a true crime show once. They shared some statistic about the percentage of times that a child is found alive if a parent or caregiver doesn't report the child missing, and it was single digits. That's all I remember. And so I was just like, well, not only do we have that dynamic, we have 2 kids and they've been missing for months, nothing about, and then they went off to Hawaii, so nothing about any of their actions indicated the activities of someone who's just trying to, tuck her kids away to keep them safe. But yeah, I don't really know where else to go with that. Yeah, it's oh yeah. So I was saying, you see them going back and forth and stuff. So I think that these little details are things that the prosecution will be able to use to help sink them. It's kind of like all the contradictions. Like there were still so many more contradictions than the ones that I went through. But when you see the cumulative impact of all of these contradictions, one, not only does it point to, there having been complicity, at least between Alex and Lori. I don't believe Tylee ever in a million years, and not because I need to believe that. That just wouldn't be. I don't believe that would be in her personality or character, and she wouldn't have benefited in any way. But but yeah. So I shouldn't say that. I mean, if they thought they were going to get $1 million, then there would have been benefit there. But yeah. I don't know. I get on these probably because I'm getting tired. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these questions, they're good questions, but they're tough, you know. But my point being, I think, you know, like all of these like smaller details will help a jury, you know, kind of get past reasonable doubt. Because I've been shocked at some of the cases that, you know, have come back with a hung jury or innocent, just because, you know, there was one standout or there was reasonable doubt, you know, obviously O.J. Simpson in the glove. But so I think a lot of these, you know, a lot of these smaller details will have that kind of trickle down effect to help prevent that. Thanks, Jim. She said, thank you for being a voice for Tylee. Did Tylee have an inheritance from her father that Lori might have been interested in? That is the $1 million question. I'm sure she did. Knowing Joe, there's no question in my mind that he had a life insurance policy. I was very upset to find out that the state of Texas required that he maintain a $350,000 life insurance policy payable to Lori. So, you know, when I saw that, I was actually surprised he made it as long as he did. And I don't know how the state would have justified that $350,000. That's a lot, especially for Tylee not being special needs and stuff. But yeah, I'm sure, you know, even if he didn't have a $350,000 life insurance plan, I'm sure he would have had something. One thing that Lori did when I was there in 2018 that I thought was very unbelievable. So I told her, you know, I was like, Lori, I know there were all these issues, you know, with Joe and, you know, between you guys. But one thing I know about Joe is that he absolutely would have had a life insurance policy with Tylee as a beneficiary, because when I forget if I was in college or if I wasn't still in college, I was a very young adult. And, you know, and Joe told me that now he loved to be the hero. You know, and so, but he had told me that he wanted me to know that he had a life insurance policy and he listed me as the beneficiary. And so I was like, really? Wow. Why? You know, and he was like, well, if anything happens to me, I just want to know, you know, like my little sister is taken care of. And anyway, and so, but I just think back to that and think, well, if he would have done that for me, you know, like, obviously he would have done that for his sister. I mean, his daughter. If he would have done that for his sister, he would have done that for his daughter. So, yeah. When I talked to an agent in the Phoenix office, the FBI office, and this was after getting shut down by the detective over Joe's case in Phoenix. I mean, he just, you know, he's such a mansplainer and just like, no, we're not reopening the case. And excuse me, he really went too far by telling me, your brother died of a heart attack. Excuse me. And I was just like, oh man, don't let this 12-year-old voice throw you. And so I've called him out multiple times on Twitter for that, you know, because that was just next level. Like, you don't know for sure, you know, so to tell me, like, to just mansplain like that to me. So no confidence in law enforcement in Phoenix. But so when he shut me down, I went to the FBI. I reached out to them. And, you know, my point was, at that point, the kids hadn't been found. And I was like, the insurance, because he had also told me, if you're interested in the policy, that's a civil matter. And I was just like, I'm not one of these people. I was trying to make the point to him, like, follow the money. Like, if Joe had a policy for Tylee, and, you know, there was some clause, like, you know, I didn't know at that point if she had been emancipated. I was very concerned when I read in the court documents that Charles had filed that it said that they had emancipated children. So I was like, oh my gosh, did she have Tylee emancipated just so that she could access the life insurance sooner, and then, and then got rid of her, so I just wasn't sure, but I wanted to find out about the life insurance. So all that to say, excuse me, an agent I talked to, it was a woman. She was very empathetic. We talked for quite a while, and she did assure me that they would chase that down. And so we'll see. I mean, I think now, the case has snowballed so much. They just absolutely have to. And one thing that was kind of cool is that, a point of frustration for me at times is people hear that the FBI is involved, or that they were involved, and they think like the FBI was like, well, the FBI, with the FBI on this and, all this stuff. But the FBI for this case was playing a support role. It wasn't their case. They weren't the lead. That's how it was explained to me. So they supported as they were asked to step in. So they supported and helped with some of the technology needs, and, and I don't even know what, how much they supported it. But one benefit to that, so one frustration was, because people didn't understand that nuance, they were like, woohoo, the FBI is involved. And I was like, well, yeah, they are, but, in a somewhat limited capacity. Like, we can't just like, oh, that, the justice will definitely be served because, the FBI is involved. And so I wasn't, I knew a little bit of the backstory. But the positive part of that is the agent explained to me that because if they were the lead, I wouldn't have access to the files after the case closes. Anything with the FBI or anything that's, considered, national threat and stuff like that. That's where Gabe comes in, and with his Lori was not a terroristic threat. But anyway, but anything that is, of like national threat or, something like that, you wouldn't have access to it. But because this was, this is led by the local precincts, I will, as a family member, I will have access to most, if not all, of the FBI's findings. So that part was at least very cool. So yeah, I do hope to get some insight into that, just to, I'm just hoping for some closure on why did she have, why did she have Tylee murdered? Why did she have JJ murdered? There were people who could have taken care of him. I would have taken Tylee in a heartbeat. I know that's easy to say, after the fact, but yeah. And then she was so close, to being an adult. I was 17 when I was on my own. But all right, I'm going to give this a few more minutes. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, Marielle. Yeah, Tylee wasn't Venmoing Colby money. It was Lori trying to pretend to keep Colby from suspecting weirdness or to buy his silence. Because it's definitely notable that he was very worried about Tylee and the fact that she wouldn't return his call. She wouldn't call him after her birthday, but then, there was another 2 months that transpired before the welfare check. So who even knows? It would be just like Lori, though, to exploit his, financial vulnerabilities. And, we've all been there. Most people have been there who weren't just, who didn't just grow up with a silver spoon, so. Somebody said for a moment you look like Ali Sheedy in The Breakfast Club. It's one of my favorite movies of all times. I could do her dance. No. Yeah, that's okay. That's funny. I quote The Breakfast Club all the time. You know, you were a child of the 80s if you love The Breakfast Club. Okay. I know since you've started, your lives look brighter. How have you been since the last live? You mentioned in the past you woke up angry. How are you doing today? Oh, that's sweet, Cassidy. So sweet. Yeah, so it's, you know, I think one of the weirdest things to me was to wake up angry, you know, like just morning after morning. Like sometimes I would just like open my eyes and like, again, the gerbils must have just been going in their cage because I would wake up like mid just like, fuck you, Lord, you know, and it was just like all of this just angst and anger and stuff. And then, you know, like as the morning progressed, I was able to kind of tamp it down, and usually, you know, pretty quickly, but it was kind of a horrifying feeling like, oh my gosh. And you know, a lot of people told me, a lot of people who have experienced, you know, crime in family and stuff, they would tell me like, this changes you. It's definitely made me more emotional because ironically, one of my biggest hesitations in coming forward is that I'm not naturally a very emotional person. And being an analyst, I was afraid that I would get up there and like look and sound like Data, you know, and Data the character, not Data the numbers. And so, you know, I was completely unprepared for, you know, just getting up and like losing it in interview after interview after interview. So I was like, well, you know, that was a worry wasted. But anyway, so yeah, I really just like in the last maybe couple weeks, maybe 2-3 weeks, I noticed I started waking up happy again, you know, and so that was. But there was also something like kind of, you know, a rumbling that I, from a reliable source. And, you know, I don't put too much stock in it, but somehow that piece of like, you know, supposed good news or something. And I'm not trying to be cryptic, but I also don't want to like falsely attribute it to just doing the YouTube lives or whatever. But somehow the combination of just different things and kind of giving myself permission to, you know, like experience life and also, you know, just living in New York City, like while all of this was going on, you know, the city looked post-apocalyptic, you know, and so, you know, that did not help, you know, because it was just like, here I was just like an absolute wreck. And then I walk out and the city looks an absolute wreck. And it was just bad news after bad news, you know, and I really kind of like feed off the energy of the city, you know, and so, I lean slightly more extroverted than introverted. But anyway, so I think just overall, I just feel like, I guess just the impact of, you know, like the case has slowed down in terms of the news cycle. Because I think one thing that probably didn't help was you know, like typically when a crime is committed, and I'm not trying to in any way minimize anyone's experience with crime, but just from crime shows, you know, I've probably watched quite hundreds of them over the years, over about 15 years. And, you know, typically you find out about the crime and you might not know like who committed the crime, and you know, there might be mystery in that regard. But the thing that made this case was so weird is that there were so many things you didn't know. And so there was just this like undulating pattern of, you know, the news cycle. And then you mix in, you know, reporters kind of going rogue. There were falsified news stories or falsified interviews and stuff. And, you know, so I would check in with law enforcement and they would be like, no, there's no merit, you know, to that story. And I even like detected a pattern to these, like, I hate to say fake news because I hate that term, but it was just the stories were falsified. You know, it was like an arms race to get the traffic from the story. And anyway, so, you know, I just think like that made it more difficult to get like your footing, because you would think like, okay, all right, I think we have some idea what's going on. And then it was just like, you know, another wave. And, you know, then speculation and, you know, all that stuff. So anyway, so yeah, I do feel like, I feel like you know, I see the light, you know, at the end of the tunnel, and it doesn't appear to be an oncoming train. And, you know, it helps that they're behind bars. They're where they need to be. And so, yeah, I think bit by bit, like I'm sure what people say is correct. I'm sure it changes you, you know, experiencing this. But I was starting to worry for a while, like, am I going to become one of those like angry, crusty New Yorkers, you know? And so, so yeah, overall, I definitely feel like a difference in like my overall temperature. It's like kind of coming down a little bit. But anyway, so thank you. Okay, I'll answer 2 more questions. Do you know why Tylee was Venmoing Colby money? Whew. Again, I'm kind of tiptoeing through the tulips on this one. So when Tylee was actually Venmoing Colby, it seemed to be for like small stuff, you know, like, but my family, we all use Venmo. We're always like Venmoing each other and stuff. Very rarely do we ever keep it on public. It's like friends or private. But the story was that Tylee was Venmoing for Lori because at one point Colby said because Lori wasn't tech savvy, didn't know how to use Venmo. But that wasn't true because she had opened up a Venmo account. It was right before Christmas, I think. 2018. And every one of the transactions were to Colby and his wife, Kelsey, that were viewable, that weren't set to private. So I was friends with her on Venmo, so I could, you know, see anything set to friends. But then she opened up another Venmo. So she has a Venmo, venmo.com/Lori-Vallow, but then she had another Venmo, Lori-Vallow, I think -1, or there might just be a 1 at the end. And that's actually against Venmo's terms of service. Like, you're not allowed to have more than one Venmo account. So, and you definitely can't on the same device. So I was like, oh, she has another device. So most likely, then later we found out about this phone that she had that was just for Chad calls. So if I had to put money down on anything, I'd say that's where the second Venmo account was. But I, just knowing what I know of Lori, for her to pull off what she did and to not, and I'm not in any way trying to, I'm really trying to walk delicately here, but I think she exploited, I personally suspect, I should say, that Lori, her intention was to exploit Colby's financial problems. Because I know even when I was there, she had said, and this was May 2018, because there was a 5-week delay in my finding out, and then a little bit more delay in booking the ticket. And so she told me that Colby and Kelsey had just moved out. So I don't know how soon that was before, but when they got married, they moved in with Lori and Charles, according to Lori. And I think they were just trying to, I guess, like save up money and stuff. And she said that Charles was the one who said, you guys need to go start your lives. And so, you know, and then they had a baby and stuff. And so, you know, I just think it would be in keeping with Lori's, I don't know, profile, to use whatever she could to, you know, intimidate people into staying quiet or buy their silence. I really, really don't know. But, you know, as a mom, and, you know, I've helped my kids, you know, financially over the years. My kids are adults, but the exploitive nature of what she did is just, it's so disgusting. Like the fact that, you know, like she would be, you know, allegedly, it's safe to assume that she was the one who had control of Tylee's Venmo. You know, we won't know until all the proof is in. But if she was the one controlling Tylee's Venmo, you know, she could have chosen any number of options to be able to send Colby money in a way that other people wouldn't know about it. She could have done it, you know, internally through her bank. She could have set it to private on Venmo. She could have done PayPal. I mean, she could have wired him money. I mean, there were endless ways. And she could have sent the money from her Venmo. She had already sent him money multiple times. So these 3 transactions that happened after Tylee went missing. Now there are only, last I had checked, and this was several months ago, there were only 2. One of them had been set to private, the most recent one. And so, but there were originally, I'm pretty sure, 3 after Tylee had died. I think 1 in September and 2 in October. It's been a while since I've looked at that. But anyway, you know, I mean, it was just cruel. It's just like, why would you do that? Why would you let anyone know that, you know, like she could have transferred the money from Tylee's account. Like if these were sizable transfers, she could have transferred the money from Tylee's account to her Venmo and then transferred the money to Colby. That's just one more way. And instead, she kind of throws Colby into, you know, this cloud of, you know, questions and stuff, you know, of like about this money. And so anyway, you know, it's just in keeping with, you know, a malignant narcissist. And so I don't, yeah, I have no idea, you know, just how much control. I mean, and it's not on me, you know, it's none of my business how much, you know, like how much Colby's going to have to work through to, you know, kind of cut her out of his life, at least emotionally. But yeah, I mean, you can be sure that if she was involved, it was to her benefit. It's all she's capable. I mean, you know, she's not pure evil. She is capable of, you know, she was when I knew her. She could be, you know, incredibly loving. But yeah. Anyway, okay. I think, yeah, I'm about to turn into a pumpkin and I'm not seeing any more questions. I'm sure there were plenty. But anyway, it was great hanging out with you guys. And yeah, we'll circle back. I don't plan to hit on every single detail of the case. I don't plan to become a crime blogger or YouTuber. Like, I look forward to getting back to, you know, just writing and doing videos about data. But I do plan to, there's still more of the story that I want to tell Not because I don't think others, can tell it, but I do think that the dashboard has kind of given me a unique vantage point just because I can, check things against like actual text so easily. Compiling it, that's another story, but because I do still have a full-time job and, a life. But anyway, so yeah, there are a few more details that I do want to hit on, and then it might be occasional, but my goal and my hope is to, by the end of the year, kind of like, okay, all right, transition back into like my life as an analyst, and start to get a little more distance from the case. So with that said, we will meet back up soon. Thanks, guys.